I'm going to record right now, and we're going to go live. This will be nice. We are a community, not an industry. How about that?
I love that as a starting point, sir. That's a great conversation right there. We are a community. We're also an industry, but we were and still are a community. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to just start now. We just went live and we just showed up. So I'm going to copy this. There we go. Boom, 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 boom. Sharing the link. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. We are here for Hash Church 4.0 episode 5. And what an incredible crew of OGs we have in the room just right away. The early birds, really, the 5 minutes. I think Valeri actually was even in the chat like at 8:20. I got an email saying Valeri went into the Zoom chat. I was like, okay, she is ready to be a part of this. That was exciting. Welcome to everyone. Welcome to Etienne and to Wade and to Skunman Sam and Valeri Coral, who I actually met for the first time at Skunman Sam's apartment in Amsterdam many years ago for a nice dinner. So thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And here we are so many years later, and we're going to have a nice little chat. And the other day when I was thinking about what we were going to chat about, for whatever reason, it came to me that we are not an industry, we are a community. And that was sort of the conversation starting point I thought that we would have this morning. I know it'll head in a whole variety of directions, but yeah, we are not just an industry, we are also a community. And a lot of the people who are in the room right now really have fought for that community more than most. So hats off to all of you with my new very short haircut, and welcome. Nice to see you all.
That was a nice visit in Amsterdam so many years ago. Sort of the kind of the awakening, part of the awakening, been going on a long time, but
greetings from Amsterdam, Valeri.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure, Skunk Man. It's just so sweet. Really nice to connect with you. Your cute little hat.
Well, I think a lot of us are community, but I think the industry is usurping and growing stronger and stronger, and only some of those have community links, to be honest.
Sure, because that's any corporate state. There you go. Where's my red hat?
Got my Phrygian cap of freedom and liberty going.
Nice.
Well, you know, it's corporations sometimes talk about family, but it's mostly a conversation, right? And a lot of things are changing in the world that we live in.
Corporations are driven by profit. If they don't profit, they cease to exist. Community doesn't have to profit. It just has to survive.
And Valeri, you were the example early on of those that fought strong, combined with patience, and fought hard to survive. You were the leader to us that were the dispensaries. You were out there showing compassion, and we wanted to reflect that as well. And some of us did and carried that reflection, and as we're aware, that community was overgrown, needless to say, by those profiteers who didn't necessarily seem or have the same ideals that you and others instilled in us in compassionate giving to those that were less fortunate than us, that were able.
Yeah, well,
thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I think, well, I probably would be just a few years out of prison had it not been a community that we were all part of. You know, WHAM was something that was driven by the fruit of it came through the community itself, and really recognizing that so many great things happen with the effort of a lot of people, like this movement. You know, I really joined a movement that was already well ensconced in this our worldwide community, you know, our worldwide cannabis community, marijuana back when we called them marijuana. So I've just been pretty lucky. So, and get to hang out with all of you on a Sunday morning for a bit.
Well, not only were you lucky, you fought for that change and pushed for that change and worked at which was most important, you worked at a local level. You worked within your region of your state, and everyone rallied around you when they saw what you were doing and why you were doing it. There were little of us that were like, no, what they're doing is wrong. No, you were taking patients and making sure that they contributed at one point or another to the growth, processing, or harvesting of this plant, which was an example that many of us were not aware is something that could be done. But you went there and you said, no, this is how it can be done. And when they messed with you, you fought back. I mean, when they tried to raid y'all, people blocked the roads. I mean, there's a lot of real drama to the history that a lot of people here have lived, and you were a saint to us on a hill showing us how to do it right. And not only that, you would take us in and you would say, okay, this is how it should be done. You're doing this wrong. You should be doing it this way. And you mentored us as well and kicked us in the ass. So we're also humbled and thanks for that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in and add to what Etienne was saying. I think it was the first time the feds raided you, Valerie. I had been living in San Francisco for a number of years at that point and had kind of heard about your work, but was not really aware of the extent and the compassion that you brought to that work. And honestly, the news coverage of that event, that first bust that you experienced down there, that Etienne was just referring to, served as a model for I created a series of collectives and co-ops that up till today, it's still the model that I work with. Thank you, Valerie. You set a high standard that I'm deeply grateful for. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I didn't do it alone. You know, Mike worked with me. We don't work together now, but it was all built, you know, built from the strength of many. And that's what really is one of the, it's elemental, it's key. Well, it's key to our conversation today, community, right? So we start, our families are our first community, and then we build from there, relying on each other and nobody co-opting, the working cooperatively, but nobody co-opting the ownership. And, you know, everything changes. This is 30 years later, and it's wild to watch it. I'm glad to see a lot of what's happened, especially freeing the plant, freeing the people. Of course, anything that's this inviting and magical and has the opportunity to create a lot of revenue is going to be co-opted by, you know, by the corporate state, by corporations, by industry, create an industry around it. That's just the way it is. We live in a very commercial, competitive, capitalistic world. Problem with capitalism is that it, you know, I say this a lot, it only measures profit in one way, but there are many ways to measure profit. And I think the balance comes when we begin to see beyond the narrow scope of financial profit, and that we realize that people's happiness is part of that profit, people that work, people who benefit from all of those things are profit. And they aren't necessarily commercialized, but if we could, you know, if it could be figured a way to commercialize that and make money off of it, probably would work better for an industry. But enough said about that. That's just that's one of the frailties of a one-dimensional system. Oh, that's not a
communities like love. You've got to give more than you take. It's also the way you make healthy soil. You give more than you take.
Yeah, you're right. You open your hand to give something, before you know it, it's full. Right.
That's interesting, Sam. You give more than you take, because capitalism is pretty much the opposite, where you take more than you give. And you can definitely see those two systems are at, I mean, cannabis has shown us so beautifully how those two systems are at odds with one another, particularly because they removed cannabis for so long from that system of legal profiteering and capitalism and all of that. Of course, many of us used cannabis. I certainly, one of the first things I learned about cannabis before I knew of its medicinal properties, before I knew of all the magical things that it could do, what I noticed, and that this was, I didn't realize at the time, but it was really because of the prohibition of cannabis, that it allowed me to remove myself from the slavery of a wage job. I figured out cannabis in a very unique way. I wasn't trying to make money so badly or whatnot, but what I figured out was I figured out a way to monetize enjoying being with my friends by getting them something that they seemed unable to find on their own, at least to the caliber of which my olfactory was allowing me to find, because I had this heightened sense of smell and taste. And I used that to go out and really curate great cannabis and find people who took this plant a little more serious than others. And that was really my first experience. I mean, obviously I smoked the joint. I was 14 years old. I had the time of my life, and it slowly moved into this, oh, wow, I can kind of monetize this. And so it's a strange tension that we find ourselves in now, especially with the situation here in Canada, with the situation down in California, with so many lifelong people kind of getting pushed out of this ability to use cannabis to monetize their life. And it's sad. It's a bummer. I don't really know how to feel about it. I don't love the idea that it's just moved over to a different group, yet I understand that everything else in the world is like that. And it's, I find myself questioning it constantly. Like, here I am in this legal regulatory framework of cannabis. And I remember what it was like. I remember my friends serving 10 plus years in prison. I remember guns. I remember dogs being shot and children being taken away. And when I remember those things, I think, well, it's way better than it was. It's way better than it was. But then I hang out with younger people who are like, oh, they're taxing us this and they're doing this and they're crushing our business. And that's terrible too, but not quite to the level of what a lot of the people in this room experienced by, being arrested for basically being a habitual florist.
Well, and providing and taking that risk by doing so. And that's something that we always realized, that it wasn't just about money, that there had to be compassion and always attached, that there were always going to be people who could not afford cannabis, people that were going to be surprised, you've just got cancer. And now you have to figure out how to deal with regimen to get healthy, and you hear about this cannabis, and it just, again, it reminds us of that human element. It's still done one-to-one. I mean, as much as I love going on Capitol Hill a few weeks ago and trying to affect change at a national level, it still requires that one-on-one, somebody coming in and says, hi, I just found out I have stage 4 breast cancer. I need help. And that's where all of us here have been involved, because we weren't thinking of necessarily about the money as much as this human is hurting and needs help. And we've all found ourselves healing through the cannabis. So we kind of all took it upon ourselves to then help and do what we can to risk our freedoms to help other people, because, again, this was still very much a gray area. What Valeri was doing was legal. But what we as dispensaries were doing, we didn't have the legal right, and we had to actually work illegally to actually change the laws at the state level so that we could finally be accepted and not necessarily continue to be prosecuted. But somewhere in that situation, the compassion has been lost. We continue to do it at Berkeley Patients Group. We still give away free cannabis every week to those that have established the need. And unfortunately, as the industry has grown, the compassion has shrunk, and we need to remind the industry of the compassion that Valeri and others established and weighed for us to continue to follow. Because, as we know, the cancer rates have gone from 1 in 3 to 1 in 2 in the past couple of decades, which means there's going to be a long need for many decades for humans to require the need for medical cannabis. And everyone on here has made sure that is a possibility. And I am humbled and thanked to call you family at some point.
I think one of the things that we're looking at, most most assuredly is with the pharmaceutical industry's move toward or absconding with I'm going to say absconding with medical, because when cannabis is created into, it's not that it isn't a medicine, but when it's created into a pharmaceutically owned medicine, we won't be able to supply medicine. We'd be practicing medicine without a license. So the idea that, I mean, it will become privatized, it will become a commodity that physicians have to approve, it'll be pharmaceuticalized, and that will involve insurance companies and physicians, and we'll take even a step further away from the idea of building community around need and service. And I think that's it's one of the reasons we changed our name, because medical marijuana is soon to be something of the past as far as people supplying or offering from one to another. That is not that we can't do it on the down low, the way we probably all started, right? I mean, I know we did. We started on the down low. And moving away from these industrializing and pharmaceuticalizing, these things move us further away from the unity of building family, of being present with one another. And when we aren't present with one another, we miss the connection of each other's eyes, of observing one another's suffering, of being able to lend a hand in whatever way that is. And someday it's going to be me, it's going to be everybody, we're mortal. And so as we serve ourselves, as an industry serves us, it's as important to serve each other. And everybody's in the job of service. Everybody has a commodity to sell if you're in business, and it's all the same thing. I mean, the service industry is this huge thing. It's life. It's, we just get kind of mucked up in what we need, in our needs. Hey, you guys, muted. You're mute. Yeah.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning, everybody.
Wade
nice to see
and
old
Val,
friends.
old friends. It's making my heart feel really full. It's so incredibly wonderful to see you, Wade, Valerie, Etienne, Mark. It's been a while as well. And of course, Marcus, all the love to you all. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I feel super honored. And talking
welcome.
about compassion, I just think that this is where the most important thing that we can really talk about in humanity, no matter what corporation or what entity or what family or what religion or what socioeconomic group that you're in, when we talk about compassion, we're talking about a very humanistic quality, just like what Valerie said, this one-on-one. And unfortunately, the big education, the big pharma, they come in to try to take that away. And when we don't have compassion anymore, we lose what it is that we came in here to begin with. I know that I entered into cannabis because of compassion from the very beginning. And although there's lots of different sort of sharks along the way that want to take us out of compassion, I feel like when it is me and I am making those last breaths on my deathbed with my friends around, I just want to know that I continued on with compassion, because then, it's just not worth living my life, honestly, unless we're doing it in a way that is connecting with other human beings in this wonderful, amazing collective consciousness that we have, that we often forget about the power of it.
It's almost interesting that, modern medicine goes down to places like South America, places like the Amazon, and they go and they try and take those compounds out of the forest and makes a synthetic version. They kind of do that to us. Like, as a human population, we're like the rainforest medicine makers of the people realm, and then they come into our people and they try and fragment us and isolate our things, and it just doesn't work as well. So give thanks that there's still people like us in the world, and that there's still intact environments for us to learn from. And there's some people out there that just don't go along with everything. And I think that's a positive thing.
And I wanted to say one thing just to share with everybody this morning, is that speaking of large corporations that are trying their hardest to make things non-compassionate, is that we got a letter, Dragonfly Earth Medicine got a letter from the Environmental Protection Agency.
And this would be our nutrient company.
A cease and desist on Dragonfly Earth Medicine because nettles, alfalfa, and kelp are now going to be listed as a pesticide. So if you are to be using them in any nutrient that's not a synthetic NPK, then you are to be registered with pesticide EPA. And they told us that they've been watching us for over 2 years. And they said if we use the word healthy, biodynamic, anything having to do with plants' well-being at all, then we're stepping into the pesticide area.
And fertilizer era.
And I want to let you all know sort of what Josh was saying is that they have taken all of our education that we've been doing for the past couple of years, and they're integrating it for self to own. So very interesting and very much so along the lines of what we're talking about today. And we're dealing with it. We're getting through it because that's what we do. This is just another roadblock, and we're really good at roadblocks. So
it's 3 o'clock. Roadblock.
3 o'clock roadblock.
Yeah, it's just, you know, we have micronized herbs with bacteria found all over the earth and mycorrhizal fungi, and they're actually trying to stop that from going into people's farms simply because going to a Wikipedia page as simple as that and just saying what does nettles do in a, you know, in a garden environment, you can't just copy what's online, you know, say off of Wikipedia, you know, whether you'd want to do that or not. But just I'm just talking about the simplicity aspect of it. It's mind-blowing that
this is the danger of compelling speech. When you compel speech, you create a very, very dangerous environment. And this is compelling speech because now they're controlling what is a pesticide and changing that language and moving the goalposts and affecting and creating this obstacle for you guys. I have zero doubt that the tension that this creates will turn that obstacle into, well, you guys will turn that obstacle into an opportunity because you're on the right side of this and they're clearly on the wrong side of this. Sorry for cutting you off, John.
I think what we were just going to say is that it just goes along with this long line of the people and the community continuing in compassion and them finding out that that's a popular game over and over again. They find out that togetherness is a popular game and they want to own it. But we know that, you know, love will win because just like, you know, if there's only love and fear, we're really interested in staying in the love and we'll just let them define and take care of fear. And pretty soon they're going to tell us that love needs to be listed under as a pesticide as well, because health and biodynamics and everything is, but that's okay.
The positive thinking thing, come on, come on, there's no statistics.
And then actually, just like you said, Marcus, as soon as we got it, it was an incredible opportunity for us to look at all kinds of things. We really have taken it on as an unbelievable opportunity. And like I had said before, we've been moving into plant medicine and I've been doing a lot of therapy sessions with people that have been absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, wow, the healing that can happen with plants is, we all know that, but now that we're stepping into something, yes, exactly.
Giving thanks.
Giving thanks for that. Yeah, so it's given us opportunity to look at other things, and cannabis has opened the door for all of the other plant medicines and all of the entheogens. So as she opens up the door, we all just need to walk through and remember that love guides the way.
Energy never goes away, it just moves to another area.
I just wanted to mention too that I do not believe that all corporations intrinsically are evil. I mean, a lot of them certainly are, they're sharks, but you got to remember that some of the corporations, like the owner of Patagonia, he gave his entire company and fortune to help companies that will fight climate change and help sustainability. So, I mean, yeah, good
Right.
things
I'm not
can be done.
talking about corporations. I think that it's really important. We're talking about like public, ones that are associated with big government, associated with lobbyists. We're not, when we're talking about a corporation like Patagonia, they do not have lobbyists. They do not have people that are trying to continue to talk about, how they can shut down people so they can make their way up. So it's really a little bit different.
Right. It's a B Corp, or Patagonia is a B Corp, and they're principled in a different foundation, right? So, and you could be a B Corp and not really be principled. I think it's, it's endemic. It's, the kind of, it's the new conquering, the way that one culture is conquered by another, where you tear down the temple and build the church. And we see, I hope that's not too vague of a metaphor, but I see this is happening in many cultures, and what's happening with plants now. We're science now. I mean, I love to be able to have access to scientific data and information, and I feel very fortunate to live in a time when I am able to do that. And I also see that one of the issues that appears to be arising is, again, the dismissal or the removal of the shaman or the teacher from the process. So we have a medicine, or we have a claim and a claim that we associate with it. And then, how did it even become, was it even discovered that it was a medicine? It wasn't in a laboratory. It was through messaging from the plant, connection with nature, and that kind of exquisite opportunity that we have to deeply listen and be taught. Because we're all, I get confused sometimes thinking that I'm teaching something when really I'm just listening and being able to hear what I'm being able to listen more deeply and listen to some truth, some information. So I think it's really a danger. It's more than co-opting, and it's when you have a goal, if you go toward the goal, the things that are in your way can be pushed aside or will be pushed aside. And we have to look at that in our own lives. And as we reflect on the ways that it is happening around us, we're oppressing our own planet at a great cost.
But we're
I think,
also evolving.
Go ahead,
as
Etienne.
well. Such as we started off, we had to all be not for profits, but we could not get corporation. And that's a full vetting cycle that is making sure that you have diversity, you hire diversity, you're paying fairly, and all that. So there's, even in the corporate world, there are things like beneficial corporations, which are the standards. Now, we lost that when the government forcefully evicted us, had to lay off 50 people, therefore putting us below that 70 or 75 person threshold they needed to have beneficial corporations. But it also shows the need that even in the new beneficial corporation, there are even limits that they need to lower to be more accessible to everyone, because I would love to continue to still be, but due to the industry itself and its collapse, I can no longer possible as an example. But I mean, Valerie, you led by example, and everybody kind of went away from that. We've tried to lead by example by still compassionate giving, and people have gone completely away from that. So we also have to be these stewards and reminders to people that the job is not done and there is still much more work to do.
I think the division that human beings tend to create naturally can be really viewed at both ends of life, in the birth and in the death of a human being. And when you look at that, you know, when Valerie's talking about connection and how this connection has been lost in the pharmaceuticalization of cannabis, we'll look at the pharmaceuticalization of birth and the lack of connection that's there. Of course, very important. Something goes wrong, a hospital is an amazing place to be able to be an emergency room for something that's going wrong with the mother or the baby. But just that disconnect of how different it is when you have a home birth with a midwife and you have that eye-to-eye connection and you don't have anyone sort of controlling the other person and trying to be like, I'm the guy here that's doing this. And you see it in the way we die as well, and the way people die in hospital beds versus, you know, having death gatherings where people are actually taking you through your death. And then you can see how it affects everything in between. And I'm sure, you know, there's always this tension. And I somehow think that it's part of the human experience, because we're not here to be the same thing. We're here to have our free will and to have these experiences. Both sides of the coin have to exist. And in that tension, and I don't really know how to put this into words, but I feel that the value of life can be found in that tension. You know, the tension between life and death, the tension between one person's vision versus another person's vision. I'm sure, Dr. Mark, you could get into metaphors of chemistry and how all sorts of magic happens in the tension of chemistry. And it's a really interesting thing how we're constantly creating division naturally. It's like, oh, this side wants to do it this way. Well, we want to do it this way. And, you know, Josh sort of spoke upon it earlier. It's good that we exist, but, you know, in the words of one of my neighbors, Heather, this 80-plus-year-old woman, she said, well, it's all love, Mark, isn't it? It's all love. So don't worry about it. It's all love on both sides. Even the side that you think isn't love, it's love too, just from a different perspective. So there's my sort of flaky love.
I think that's all. Marcus, I love that, because I feel like also what's happening with, you know, what happened with cannabis, we saw that anything that has a nature connection is something that can be looked at and can be attacked. Science is definitely very helpful, but unfortunately, science likes to say that it's more important than nature sometimes. Science likes to say, hey, I've got it more figured out even than nature does. Whereas nature never goes back and says, oh, that was the wrong experiment. You know, we didn't have it right. But science is always, you know, redoing it. Oh, 10 years later, that wasn't totally right. And I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I feel like it's, you know, science is really important, but I feel like we're going more towards the technical side of science, more the mechanism side of science, and demonizing a lot of what nature has to show us and nature has to guide us. One thing that's becoming incredibly apparent with that is, while I think that MAPS is incredibly helpful in pushing forward plant medicine and what they're doing, I'm also incredibly concerned because it's taking a lot of the science side of it. So you go into an office, you put something over your eyes, you listen to a certain music, you have this incredible, which people say is, you know, like a near-death experience or like a birth experience. It's that life-changing that then you take the mask off and you go to work the next day. Nature is not involved.
But sorry, excuse me, go ahead. I apologize.
No, go ahead, Val. I want to hear it. Go ahead. Let's riff it.
Everything is like that. Whatever our experience that awakens it. I just want to back up the thing with MAPS. Like, in order to bring these experiences to people, there are certain safeguards within the context of the scientific community, and they're there for, that's the way they've socially been built. It doesn't in any way change our experiences with psychedelics, or we still have those opportunities to use them. And I see why that, I think we can all see why there are problems. Somebody might, flip out, have a bad experience, may have a heart attack. These kinds of things rarely can't, but they can happen. And guidance is a really important tool. Having the teacher, the connection between the shaman or the guide and the intention of our journey. But I think it's true with everything, like I'm sometimes surprised. I'm like, did anybody not anybody, but I'm working with people in cannabis. Like, did they ever get high? Like, I mean, what happened to the experience? What happened to that piece that changed us or opened our hearts? Or, what is it that we lose when we walk away from the experience? Because we walk away from an experience, it lasts for an instant, it opens or changes us in some way. But then what do we take with us from that? So I see that's just part of the problem, but it does not in any way change, I think, the need for science. Science is going to take it to people that we, in Dubai, it's going to take it to people all around the world that would not in no other way have an opportunity or may not have another opportunity to experience it.
I do totally agree with you, Val, and I think it's a really important part, but I think the concern that I have in this is that these are plants that come from nature. They have a message of nature. And when therapists or the mentor is only another human being, taking nature out of the factor as a mentor, as a teacher. When I work with people and I'm working on plant medicine, I could have somebody for a half an hour looking at a leaf and downloading nature and downloading what it feels like to lie on the ground. And I have a concern that if we take nature out of the picture as nature, as a mentor in this, as a teacher, as an expansive knowledge, then we're only looking towards another human being who is incredibly limited. And I feel like that's where the clinical setting, yes, it may bring it to more people, but I feel like it's lacking. And I feel like if we could at least go to where the plants are grown in the ground and get out of the clinical setting, maybe we need to bring the clinicians out to nature more. Something has got to happen where nature is, and sometimes I go through a whole 6-hour plant medicine therapy session with somebody and we don't talk at all because nature is downloading everything that person needs to do by just simply going on a walk.
Right.
And I feel that if we're going to juice people up with plant medicine and they're going to go to these incredible psychedelic spaces and they're going to be really looking at why they're here, they're going to be looking at their soul path, they're going to have an understanding. I feel like if nature is not involved in that conversation and that guidance, then that person is severely missing out on the potential possibilities of where they could go.
Well, they're just missing out on that possibility. It's not, one doesn't negate the other. So not everybody would be comfortable laying on the ground in the forest, and not everybody can access it. Somebody who's paralyzed is going to have a hard time doing that. People who are sick, who can't get out of bed. I guess what I'm trying to say is I fully agree with you. And that's one path. And there are 8 billion of us or so. And there are 8 billion ways to leave behind whatever it was and open to a new path. And I think that's one of the things we want to do is to stay open to the other pathways, because what I think is happening is that door is getting shut. Lots of people are taking off and doing ayahuasca journeys and connecting, and it's remarkable what's happening today. It's really quite remarkable. And does it have to be I think there are grave issues that arise when we remove the teachers, remove the shamans, when we take the institutionalize the gift, the medicine. And yet I believe the more pathways we open, the more opportunities for people to have the experience, to carry both their intention and the outcome it only broadens, and it broadens our language, and it broadens our connection with one another, and it gives a chance, like how amazing can we be? Well, get in traffic and see how amazing you are. And that's where it, what we take from our experience and what we give, I think the room for others to have theirs experience is one of the keys that I hope we don't erase. I hope we don't miss. And I mean, I would fully agree with you that that's the remarkable healing. And people are very fortunate to be able to be in your service with you serving their needs and attending to them. And that's a very sweet and beautiful gift, but not everybody can get to you. And you really don't want everybody to get to you. I mean, I don't think, that's my opinion. I like a small community because I can be more at peace with who I serve.
And it is true. It's hard to reach everybody, and the people that we are reaching now are the people who are working with other people to, give them another look at what a healing session can look like, what it feels like outside of walls, what it feels like without, something over your eyes, and just being internal and gathering what nature has to offer. And it is changing the way that they're looking at their sessions. It is changing the way that they are making their clinics, and it is changing the way that they're seeing patients. So, the more that we can have influencers and people that are working with other people understand the power of the mentorship of nature and the power of nature as the shaman, then I think that we've got a much better opportunity to reach those, 80 million people on the planet, or whatever, 8 billion people on the planet. So
we're 8 billion versions of nature. We're 8 billion versions of evolution. We're not 8 billion versions of petri dishes, but we do.
Well, yes and no.
Well, okay,
because nature is science. And if we take it back, think of this. First of all, you guys might be forgetting how savage nature is. Do you know that the wildebeests in Africa give birth twice? First, they give birth for the lions to consume their babies live as they're coming out of the vaginas of the wildebeest. Live, it's the most savage thing you've ever seen. And then they give birth a couple of months later, and those are the ones that actually succeed the bloodline of the wildebeest, because the lions damn near consume all of the firstborn of these wildebeest. So science, our ability to create and discover, has allowed us to remove ourselves from the food chain. We used to be a part of that food chain, and let me tell you, it was super savage. Like you cannot imagine. We thought it was bad when the DEA were hunting us down with guns. It was worse when lions and tigers were hunting us down with their teeth and eating us alive. Forget about putting you in a cage. They were just consuming you whole. And so that, and if we're in all nature, well, then our science is a part of nature as well. Think about this. Think about the ability to even use the medicine you guys are using for healing right now without science. Science created that medicine. The tools of science help transform nature.
We're not diminishing nature by science or nature by any means. Go ahead.
I was just going to say basically that mycelium grows in an isopropyl hooded stainless steel environment. That shows that nature lives in all environments. We can all be enhanced or gifted by every part of life. Totally understand that. Everyone's invited. Life is amazing. That's why we have fractals and the Mandelbrot, theory and all these things that show that there's a never-ending possibility. I love connecting with nature whenever possible. Let's just leave it at that.
Well, and I also think that the conversation of the wildebeest, eating us with their big teeth, that's nature. But human beings that are sort of killing each other to become a higher position, I feel like maybe that's a little bit out of It feels like competition has taken over natural intuition. And I think that we are out of balance with science being looked at more as the thing rather than, I think we're just a little bit out of balance. I think nature is equally as important as science because we've created and we're natural beings. But at the same time, science has just taken the main news. It's on the front page, science, science, science. So people are forgetting that we can learn so much from nature. So we're just trying to continue to be a loud voice for nature because science has such a main spot right now.
Well, and if you
science is the study of nature. Science is the study of nature. You can't have science you can't have it without nature.
I agree.
We study the cannabis plant. We're part of the cannabis community. The cannabis plant doesn't express the same type of diversity in its cannabinoids synthetically as it does organically in a regenerative setting. Why would everyone be going into the earth with their cannabis? Not just because the bills are high in an indoor setting. The cannabis is different when it grows in the soil with rocks and crystals and spring water and everything. Wow, that plant's different. Complete different plant than an aeroponic setup or a hydroponic setup. I don't need to know anything else at that point. I'm like a plant, 22,000 chromosomes. There's very little different between us. You know, by saying that, it's not trying to say that 100% we're from nature, we use electricity. It's not like it's nice to not have to go down the rabbit hole of like, well, hey, what about this and that? Like, it's fine, everything else is happening. It's awesome. It's just odd in the last 3 years that the nature side of life has been demonized. It's the way it is, ostracized, witch hunt, whatever you want to call it, can't travel, can't live. There's not an actual equal playing field. So it's kind of just, sure, life's happening.
Now let's hear from a scientist, right? I know we all think we're scientists.
You want me to speak, Mark? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so
yes, to all of that.
Because I honestly believe the universe is perfect. I truly, truly believe this. And any people who can't see it, you know, I feel sorry for you, but the universe is truly perfect.
But Sam, how much acid did you take to see that? Was it like 100 hits, like 200 hits?
No, it was only 50 hits of orange sunshine.
It was 50 hits of orange sunshine. Because I know this was an acid trip.
For him to come to the conclusion that it's perfect, he's on the assumption that the universe is finite. And if we know anything from Einstein, we know that the universe is ever expanding. So I'll quote Einstein in saying that my sense of God is my sense of wonder about the universe. So let me just chime in from the science point of view for a second and say, well, okay, science is, Marcus, science of living things, science of nature is biology. There's all other kinds of disciplines in science, but it's, so think of it this way. So humans are naturally inquisitive, right? We want to learn about ourselves and our environment. So we're all scientists, but we're not all paid scientists. Right? So just there's a few of us who are paid. The rest of you, we're all scientists, and we're all building on the knowledge. We all stand on the shoulders of the people who've come before us that have, you know, led us down this path. And so let me go back to the EPA for a second too. So that's interesting that you guys got a notification from them, but remember that theoretically the EPA, which was started in 1970 by the Nixon administration, was there to basically protect the environment, right? And make sure that, you know, people weren't just making really big piles of waste or pollution or somehow damaging the environment where, yes, like it or not, food is grown in industrial ways, and the Environmental Protection Agency makes sure that, you know, things that are sold into agriculture have no long lasting impact in the environment. And while it's true that like the sort of like the living soil approach is less impactful on the environment, as taking advantage of the natural organisms and using Mother Nature's own biopesticides, if you will. In fact, the EPA for several years now has had a category called biopesticides. And if you look at the various regulations,
Right.
there are no commercial products right now whose registration covers the use on hemp or cannabis, or very, very few. And the reason why is because the onus is back on the people who own that registration for that active to run all of the trials to make sure that the application rate of their product on that agricultural product, whatever it is, doesn't have to be cannabis, could be anything, tomatoes, strawberries, anything, whatever you're applying to that has the efficacy that you claim it does. So it kills fungus or keeps insects away or whatever, but it also has to be shown to be safe by the time that produce gets to the market, that either it's been photolytically or hydrolytically decomposed to the point where whatever metabolites from that treatment that's left on those strawberries or string beans or lettuce is all below the point at which there is no effect on human health. And if there is effect on human health, they don't get a registration in that market. So now add cannabis to this. So in order for a company to get an EPA registration on anything from insecticide, fungicide, anything that you want to apply to cannabis, you'll have to have that data package. You'll have to have that data package to bring to the EPA. And now you're bringing, regardless of cannabis being, I guess federally illegal, I guess right now that's up for debate, since, hemp has now been made legal through low THC cannabis, which is industrial hemp, has now been made legal. And certainly there are companies that are going after that market, meaning that they are developing crop protection chemicals. And you'll be happy to know, you guys, that again, you guys have been pioneers in this area, and that people are taking your lead. But now, again, it's a business. They're investing millions into developing that safety package. And to know that when you brew that tea or when you use that living soil product on cannabis at that rate, that it doesn't affect, there's no residuals, there's no runoffs that poisons, water supplies, there's no, I don't know. I mean, they go through this whole environmental analysis, and that's what the EPA is supposed to do, right? It's the Environmental Protection Agency. They're there using our tax dollars to supposedly protect our environment. So I'm not just coming down as being pro EPA. What I'm saying is that we, and you guys especially, we need to work with them so they can properly regulate the use of these products in commercially grown cannabis. Because let's face it or not, I mean, you guys were talking about corporations before, and I know Sam has dealt with large corporations. I've dealt with large corporations. That's how I built my resume and got all those things on the wall. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, this is a money-making business where people are in the business to basically make a profit and either return that profit to their shareholders or their investors or whatever. I mean, that's just corporations. That's just free enterprise. And like it or not, that's what we got. We can't really do anything to stop it. So you might as well just get used to it. There's big companies that provide everything from the gasoline we put in our cars to the fast food hamburgers, if that's what you choose to eat, to everything. If there's a market for something and something wants to be bought, and Delta 8 THC is a perfect example of this, where there's a market where cannabis is illegal in certain states. So what do? Well, I turn this CBD into something that can get people high. And now you can go to websites or gas stations or bodegas and get all kinds of, products that are made outside the regulatory framework that most cannabis operations are having to live under. I say that I'm living in Vermont, guys. This is new. We moved from Pennsylvania to Vermont, and Vermont went recreational yesterday. That was the first time I've lived in a state that's turned from medical to recreational. And I got a big joint to smoke here on camera so we could celebrate it. But, you know, it's just really cool what's happening up here. There's a lot of innovation. Vermont's kind of like the Humboldt of the East, a lot of great growers, a lot of really dank weed up here in these mountains. And I'm living on Lake Champlain, which is really kind of cool. I look out and see sailboats go by. That's kind of cool. But just to go back to science, just and I'll end there, is that, you know, again, anytime you learn something, you're being a scientist. When you learn something new and you're expanding your knowledge over something, it doesn't have to be scientific. It could be, you know, just a quicker way to get to work. Or it could be, you know, gee, if I stirred my coffee more, it wouldn't be so sweet at the bottom. You know, just little realizations like that. You're learning new things, and as you learn new things, you're basically being a scientist. So we're just explorers. Those of us who are paid scientists have to explore right at the current frontier on what's known and what's not known. And we all know people have been asking for years. And I think part of my attraction here on church, right, has always been the science and the research and, geez, what can we do to really push this thing forward? Holy shit, folks, be careful what you wish for. This is what the end of prohibition looks like. I'm getting a faculty position here at the university to study the use of cannabinoids to treat traumatic brain injury. I mean, I have to pinch myself to understand that, you know, when we were out smoking really dank California weed and eating mushrooms on the parking lot out at the Grateful Dead shows, that we were ahead of our time back in the 70s and 80s. You know, those of us who followed the Dead around, I mean, it was just so fucking cool because that was just like this flash in time that existed. And we traversed this millennium, right? I think most of the people here, right? That's really fucking cool. I have one kid born in one millennium, another kid born in another one. I was alive during Jerry Garcia's lifetime. Really, really important for me anyway. So, you know, it's at the end of the day, we're all scientists, we're all explorers, and you know, there's nothing wrong with being inquisitive and wanting to learn more about your environment or what you're smoking or what you're growing.
And we just
totally agree. I think that that's really awesome, Mark. I think that, you know, what you're saying is true, and inquisitivity is awesome, and I love you, of course. But, you know, as far as the EPA, one thing that I did want to say is I think that we could entrust in more of these overbiting sort of corporations or fractures of the government if their track record was more accountable. When we look at the EPA, what they have allowed in and what they have allowed into our soils and what has happened to our soils with their allocations and their licensing, to me, should not have the word protection on it. So I think what we continue to come down to is they're supposedly protecting us, but their track record really doesn't show that they've done a very good job. So I feel like if we had more accountability,
the same way.
I'm not even talking about just all the way back.
The government.
For sure.
You know,
I just feel like if we're going to use the word protection,
we can bash pharmaceuticals all we want, but there's life-saving medication out there that's saving people's lives every day.
Oh, I'm not bashing that. I feel like it's really important.
Pharmaceuticals and what, like you guys were talking about, the pharmaceuticalization. I mean, that's exactly what I'm working on. I'm working on trying to understand, you know, there was a really important paper that was published a couple of weeks ago that showed that cannabinoid acids, and I think in particular CBGA, showed a complete blocking of something called store-operated calcium influx, which is a way that helper T cells turn on the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines. This is extremely important. It didn't get any press whatsoever, and it's an extremely important discovery that basically says how cannabinoids work to control inflammation. It's always just kind of like a black box. So
Right.
they hit the cannabinoid receptors, then there's downstream stuff that happens. We don't really know. This group has figured it out. So to me, I read that paper. I've read that paper 8 times. I'm so excited. I'm so like, this is the current frontier. This is right where knowledge ends and where we could start looking into the crystal ball on what could be. And when you start looking at all these ways that, cannabinoids work on the body, I mean, there's no class of compounds like that have the safety in humans, the long-term, humans have been using cannabis for a while. So if there was toxic, effects, we would have seen it. We would have documented it. Yasmin Hurd's research at Mount Sinai, New York, is extremely important. What she has now shown, and this is all very, very recent research, is that cannabis use in adolescence affects the distribution of gray to white matter as the brain matures. And this is extremely important. And you can't say, well, okay, yeah, kids who smoke weed during those ages, they can, maybe have compromised, I don't know, intellectual capacity later on in life. That's not really what they're saying. But the endocannabinoid system and the cannabinoid receptors are so important that you couldn't imagine that using lots of cannabis isn't going to somehow affect it one way or another. And I think her research is really important to show that. The last thing I want to say is this whole renaissance and what they're finding is that people who are taking, again, very, very modest doses, 6 months later, they're still showing efficacy in that treatment. It is just, it's amazing. And so I applaud the scientific frontiers in these areas, which are moving faster and faster and faster as regulation changes. And yes, that is driven by profit and the almighty dollar. I don't know. I can't fix that. And I don't think we can fix that on Hash Church, but we can coexist in that system and make sure that your guys' knowledge is passed on to these people who are regular. So basically, there are products that are going to come out that's going to mimic, what you guys do, right? So you have to be part of that discussion and part of that regulation. People are going to do this. People are already doing this. People, everything along the value chain. I know Etienne's seen it for years. If you could make it and you could sell it into the cannabis industry, it's going to go and it's going to go forward and it's going to make money and it's going to grow. And before you know it, you're going to be 10,000, 20,000, 80,000 orders. And you're going to be, oh, I need to. Sure, you don't get a bunch of fuckery and thieves and people who are poisoning people. There has to be some government oversight and some regulation. I don't know what the right level is. It's not nuclear waste. It's an herbal medication. It needs to be regulated as such. But if you're talking about treatments that go onto plants that are being mass produced, yeah, they're going to regulate that kind of thing. They should be. They always have, should be, but companies, large companies, were afraid to do the research to basically bring that package forward and say, okay, here's a fungicide that you can use on cannabis to control powdery mildew. You could apply it at this rate, at this time, and there's no degradation byproducts that are going to affect the end product. I'm not saying that product exists, but in order for companies to develop that product, they need a regulatory pathway, and then they've just spent millions of dollars. They need to recoup that investment. Welcome to big business. This is just
that's and Mark, that's the thing that they're motivated by, of course, by profit. So they're afraid, the fear comes in when there's not enough security to protect those investments. So because, right.
Yeah,
and
but
that's-
we
so
know they're going to
we-
be profitable. I think
well,
if you look at packaging,
that's not
and
the issue. That's not the issue. That's just accept it. You just accept it. You buy a Cheerio, you buy a corporation, you buy a car, you buy a Tesla, whatever you buy, it's all contextualized within that understanding. That's what capitalism is. I drive a car. As a matter of fact, I have to go do that pretty soon. So, and I think here, like you just said it about being able to use cannabis in TBIs. You're going to have this job. 50 years ago, I had a TBI. And as a matter of fact, when I got it, I was rolling a joint in the car that we got in a car accident, and it was Nevada. So TBI or not, I had to go back into that car and find that ounce or go to prison with a TBI. I think it's a profoundly important point. Not everybody's going to be able to roll joints and smoke them so that they can to mitigate their seizure onset. There has to be a way to access. Science is a tool, a profound tool. The fuck uppery, as you're saying, is not the tool. It never is. And neither is what inspires us. It's never the tool. It's how we are changed and how we carry that forward. What we're willing to, what the cost is, whether that's what we're willing to spend or what we demand of others. And so right now, I think we are in a very tenuous position, but, as Sam said, it's all perfect. And that's eventuality, not in the finite sense, in the sense that, in the quantum sense. I mean, I sort of have said, I'm going to just, if it's all perfect in the quantum sense, then I'm just going to step into that space because it makes what I can't handle just say, yeah, I can't wait to see what you do, Mark. You got to share some of your coursework that you're.
Well, I'll just finish. I think Etienne could probably provide a lot of experience, or at least maybe share some of his experiences. Like when you're dealing with vendors, I'm not talking about people who are touching the plant. I'm talking about everything else that supports going at that. You're talking about, people who have, payrolls and employees, and those employees have, benefits like health insurance. So I think it was really quick to see, like when you go to like an MJ BizCon, that if there's something that can be innovated, that can be sold into this industry, it might be a corporation, but it might just be a mom and pop corporation. Two people, just garage inventors who are coming up with the next little widget or all kinds of different, innovations, because we're kind of at the birth of this new phase for the, cannabis industry. And I hate to use that word industry because it always sounds like such a dirty word, but
it is industry.
for the lack of a better word, it's just the word that we use. But the question is, I guess, again, when you have, like, especially with CBD and the whole Delta 8 market, the whole loophole that the Farm Bill created, which created this, it basically satisfied a market that was already created. Look, people want to get high, right? And those people in most cannabis unfriendly states in the country are, gun-ho on Delta 8 because people are making a shit ton of money. And I've seen videos where I've seen pallet racks 3 high, like you'd see at like a Home Depot, of finished goods going from somewhere to somewhere. And those products are being sold without any real process specification on this conversion of CBD to Delta 8. So there's a lot of other stuff in there. And because it's unregulated, unlike the stuff that Etienne has to, I mean, everything that's sold in a regulated market, Delta 8 says, well, fuck you, we're just going to do this in an unregulated fashion.
But
And that's only
there. We've all been there. It will become regulated. It's
but
just
it's only made possible through the prohibition of Delta 9. If there was no prohibition, then we would think Delta 8 is a version of COVID or something. Delta 8 is irrelevant. Delta 8 is not extracted from the plant. It's made as an active pharmaceutical ingredient from CBD isolate.
Yeah.
So this is a market that exists because people want to get high. And if people want to get high, they need cannabis grown Delta 9, not Delta 8 made from CBD.
right. It's only a matter of time. It's just satisfying it's the market. This is really endemic of a problem that's created when there's a profit-driven creation. So they're creating this because it's driven by profit, so they can make money. When you can just really get high, you don't need to go through all of this.
The people who own those warehouses that are
issue
3 pallet racks
we're
high.
really facing, and there you can we work it out on House Church? Well, it's always worth the conversation, and this is why cannabis is legal, however long it's taken. To some degree, it's legal, but it's motivated. The legality has been motivated in 2 different ways. One, because people desire it, know it, it helps to heal the mind, body, consciousness, and because of profit, the potential to make a great deal of money. And because of that we're sitting in the middle of a kind of mosh pit and I think that what can happen is that these conversations, but really creating accountability, forcing accountability, demanding accountability from, I don't buy anything from Amazon. It's a principled piece. Maybe those things will change. Maybe that industry that owns just about everything, probably the house I live in pretty soon, or many people live in. I think we have to really work from this space as individuals, speak to our community, support our community, and ask of it the greatest possibility. We're always asking for something greater, because that's how we get it, and we demand it from one another and from our communities. And it's not going to get better if we buy into it. Only if we join it. That dropping out, we should have bought some radio stations and television stations in the 60s,
I'd like to add that, the profit-driven corporations were birthed out of something different. The first time I really understood the importance of regulation in cannabis was not from a corporation, but from my friends in Jamaica who were just growing weed on the side of a mountain. And then, I'm kind of like, I made bubble one time with the flower, and it was really fucked up bubble. And then I walked around my friend's field, and what I found was some illegal fungicides that can't even be used in North America that they just shipped to Jamaica. And he used these, and we had a conversation later on that night on the beach, and I asked him, like, what were you thinking? And he was like, I was thinking of putting food on my table, man. Like, I can't afford to lose this crop. And so it wasn't a big corporation putting people at risk. It was a poor Jamaican farmer who just wanted to feed his family, and who was, because there was no regulations, he was able to do it, but at the cost of everything. I mean, John Burfellow smoked some of that bubble, and he said that he got extremely sick from it. It was really bad. Keep in mind, when we're concentrating the resins off of these plants, often you'll concentrate these chemical powders that have been put onto the plant and are stuck on that resin. So it's not just corporations. It's not just, I got to pay my shareholders. Sometimes it goes all the way to the other side, and it's, I just got to put food on the table. I'm not trying to buy a Ferrari. I'm not trying to, be some corporate douche nozzle with a private jet. I'm really just trying to feed my kids and maybe get them some shoes and some clothes. And so
So-
that's the importance of regulation. We need to have a little bit of it to hold each other accountable. And it's not always a corporation that you have to hold accountable. Sometimes it's just
who
regular old
produced
people.
who produced those additives? A corporation.
Of course.
Right.
There is it's cyclic and it goes back, it goes back there. Anyway, I hate to jump out of this conversation with y'all, but much love. I'm so thankful for having this opportunity to hang out with you all. And much love. And
it's an honor for us as well, Valerie. Be safe on your journey.
You bet. Many big highs and much expansion.
Love you so much,
Thanks
Val.
for coming out.
You guys too.
Fills my
See
heart.
you soon.
And
Big hug.
hey, Marcus, I wanted to add to what you're saying. I think it's,
Hi, Collin.
Hey, buddy. Nice to see everyone.
Hey, Collin.
How you guys doing? It's been a while. Mark, everybody, Dragonfly fam, good to see you guys. Etienne, Best Friend Farms, always awesome. Wade, the
You
skunk
came
man
up
himself.
often in a conversation I had yesterday.
I bet, man. Adam's a G. He's a good guy, man. And if he's still listening, we love you, man.
Yeah.
He's an incredible
Yeah.
grower, and what a good family they have up in Mendocino. So Mendocino Grasslands, for those that don't know what we're talking about. Great family of individuals, really good growers.
But he calls Vermont home.
That's true. He calls Vermont home. So he's like us, an East Coaster. So, but yeah, I mean, look, I think over the years, we've all, I think it was a lack of knowledge at first in North America. We were using things on plants that we didn't know because we were so young at the time. At least my crew was. Green Cure was pushed onto us as a product to use to bring the pH level of the surface level down, so botrytis and powdery mildew wouldn't grow. But then later we learned that you can't light it on fire, right? And we've learned so much through trial and error. And I think that's the honest truth from my side of it, is like, we just didn't know. And we didn't have this big community that's so open today. We didn't have conferences. We didn't have like private events and sessions where we were sharing, like back to, like I had Marcus on truthstoners.com chat room, and we would chat, and like Plural Mongoose and Kaka and OT1 and all these guys would jump in, and that was the only space that I really knew to ask live and direct questions that would have direct call and response. So I think it's also a bit of it all together. And as we learn and evolve, having, sages such as Kelly and Josh around, and others like you that have been so deep in just learning about what agricultural practices mean, and consciousness means together, and how that kind of plays a role. So that's something that, together we've kind of, at least I should say personally, I've really, it's been a battle and a learning experience, this whole journey. Reading books from Rob Clark, and they didn't tell you what not to do. They told you what to do, how to get rid of things and what to look for. But there was never that in-between conversation. So I think those are the things that we have today that we just didn't have for so many years.
Cross and print, right?
Yeah, that was it, man. I read those books front to back to front almost every day for years. And that was just the way it was, because I didn't have anywhere else to go. There was no YouTube channels.
And there was no internet with information or basis of. But as you stated, I mean, we started off as, individual dispensaries. And then I realized that I got sick from cannabis off something I couldn't see. And so in 2007, I was like, well, what are the standards for testing? And everybody, there's no standards for testing. What do you mean there's no standards? There's no one testing except the University of Mississippi. Right. And so when I reached out to them to actually say, hey, can we get the standards? They were like, but we need the standards. And so there were no standards. And of course, I didn't know Sam at the time. So, I used Ethan Russo and others to find Arno, and then smuggled him into the States with his testing solution. and then, you know, started to calibrate an actual laboratory because I didn't want to kill people who have AIDS and cancer for the possibility that they could get a upper respiratory infection. And of course, I know now that that was an actual plate test that would have determined that, as opposed to understanding the potency. I started in that direction because that sounded like a logical, and found others, Addison and Steve D'Angelo and others, who were also interested in doing that. But if we didn't have our semi-legal / illegal dispensaries, I mean, we spent BPG over $1 million ourselves in that testing. Okay, who could have, and in the private industry would have spent that money to actually do that testing, to bring at least the testing from THC and then finding CBD from the darkness into the light? You know, it was us that took the chance because we realized there was a hole, and if we didn't necessarily fix that hole, there's always going to be a hole there that we're always going to trip over. So we, even as I'm a professional lay scientist, realized that there was science that needed to be, so that I didn't kill the people that I was selling my quote unquote legal / illegal cannabis to, because I wanted to be an ethical steward, because it felt right, because I self-healed myself from cannabis because of my Gulf War syndrome, right? Because of my multiple chemical exposures, because, you know, I was gun fodder in a war over oil. Okay, I lived under the oil fields. It was literally 28 degrees under the oil fields, whereas out from under the oil fields, it was 120 degrees. That's how thick the smoke was, ladies and gentlemen. And that, of course, destroyed my nervous system and my, you know, immunity system, to the point where I had to figure out how to heal myself. And by figuring out from cannabis and exercise, was able to stimulate my appetite to eat, motivated me to say, you know what, I need to step outside myself and find a way to help others. So sometimes we have to be self-impacted, or find a way, or someone in our lives that's been impacted, because I cannot tell you how many people have come to me and said, hey, my family member has this, that, and the other, and they can't get it, and I need to get it for them because there's no other way for us to go. Whereas 2 weeks ago, my group, the Veterans Action Council, was using science on Capitol Hill. We had 26 meetings in 2 days, and we were using that nasal spray that the medics are using currently in Israel as the litmus, because the majority of people we met with were on the Veterans or Armed Services Committee, so they had military fellows there. So what we found as the arrow through in the conversation was this TBI nasal spray, because it caused immediate shrinkage and non-expansion that continues to happen in the brains. Well, right now, Israeli medics have that in their kit. And right now, if you're hit with a TBI, no matter what, they are given this right there on the spot. And it is having great effect. And when we talk to these fellows who are just military people in regular suits for the next year, this is what got through to them, because they understood how many of their brothers and sisters are also suffering and will continue to suffer from these TBIs because of the new level of warfare that we are experiencing, or going to continue to experience. And so this was a way of using a pharmaceutical product to loosen the strings of prohibition, because that mountain is still so high for us to move, that we still have to find the human aspect and the connection to make them realize, oh, this matters to me. Why? Because my fellow soldiers could benefit from this, and we know that, oh, a lot of our military has to be taken care of, and they're not being taken care of, and these TBIs follow everybody to their grave. So it'd be best as we can to do as best as possible to do as a preventative, which, as we know, THC, or ingestion of cannabis right after TBI, seems to stop that and stop the advancement of that psychosis, as well as the death, which is the swelling of the brain itself, which causes untold amounts of life-damaging realities that not only does the soldier have to deal with, but their family and their whole support units have to deal with, as well as we ourselves have to pay for it as their care.
Yeah, they have to be doing this on the sideline at the NFL, as we've tragically seen recently, right? That these guys are out there getting their brains literally beat in, and then somehow they let that guy go back out, and he got re-injured, you know?
Yeah.
And it's fucking nuts. And the government knows it because they got their own patent on the neuroprotective properties of cannabinoids. So, I mean, this is going to happen. This is good. This is going to happen. Like you said, Etienne, the nasal spray is a quick, immediate onset into the brain. And so I think we're going to try to stack. So we're actually writing a grant to DOD and NIH and others to basically help pay for this work, because this is really, really important work. And I think we all know it's going to work. We're going to see the needle is going to move on this. We don't know exactly, again, dose, and you have to look at a lot of different impacts when you're trying to develop a new therapeutic for something like this. But you can imagine if you can deliver across the blood. So the blood-brain barrier is a very interesting kind of gateway that limits what's in your bloodstream going into your brain. And so if you can get things across the blood-brain barrier, and what we know about cannabinoids, because they're very hydrophobic, is that they can get in. We can get cannabinoids into the brain during that golden hour of trauma. So there's that 1 hour. It's like you have an hour to basically intervene. And even like with other brain disorders, Etienne, like stroke, right now with stroke, I mean, just take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. There's really no way of treating, but you figure that, again, maybe it's the fact that the government had a patent on it, maybe the fact that these things are off patent now, and now in order for a pharmaceutical company to get the return on that investment, they'd actually have to develop new medications to see if they work. I think, again, the phytocannabinoids can give us a clue on what might eventually be the treatment that gets used, that gets FDA approval and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, all that research needs to be done. And it seems like, again, I don't know why, but when the NFL publicized that they were throwing $1 billion at research, they didn't look at concussion at all. They just looked at pain, because all they want to do is dull the pain and send that drone back out onto the field, because there's $1 million sponsors that need to make money on that football game. And I tell you what, if you haven't seen it yet, you all should watch the movie Concussion with Will Smith. Yeah, Will Smith's a dick and everything, but anyway, get beyond that and go watch that movie Concussion. You'll never watch a football game in the same way again. And you'll learn that, again, the NFL is basically conspiring to basically keep this thing quiet.
Yeah, they want to keep it under wraps.
Right. And it's the same treatment, Etienne, for soldiers. It'd be the same kind of thing. It'd be like full assault of cannabinoids into the brain during that golden hour of trauma. Maybe this could have saved Bob Saget's life, right? Because Bob Saget, the comedian, they think he just fell in his bathtub or something, hit his head, fell asleep, and never woke up. So there's definitely, the cannabinoids are definitely on the therapeutic, radar, to use these things not just to get high, but to use them for their medical benefits to treat disease like this.
I was speaking with Rob Clark, and Rob Clark said, Mishulam said, in the 80s, that within that hour, if they smoked a joint just on the way to the hospital, the amount of neuroprotection that it's untold. But I'm very interested now, because you brought up strokes, because as we know that when you smoke cannabis, it dilates or can dilate the blood vessels, right? So if you're having a stroke and you've got a blockage, could that also send the blockage to another area and causing more danger? So that's where I kind of wonder.
What I'm thinking, Etienne, is just in sort of like a something where you're going to take advantage of the anti-inflammatory, pro-apoptotic modes so cannabinoids are biologically active on so many different levels. And you would think, again, that the best thing you could possibly do is get as much into your brain at that point, right after that traumatic brain injury, and just see what happens. I mean, could it be worse?
So there are people working on this, and cannabinoids are definitely key. But one of the things you guys are missing, the most important factor, are these membrane-bound extracellular vesicles that are called exosomes. Exosomes have the ability to get through the blood-brain barrier. My friend who works at the neurosurgery department in Florida, Miami, Dr. Brent Reynolds, he discovered brain stem cells for his thesis in the late 80s. Brilliant guy, awesome guy. He's been doing some research at the university on these exosomes, and when they put exosomes into the nasal spray and up the nose, they found that it was delivering a 45 times payload from any other method that they have at the university there, 45 times. So they are working on concussion medications that'll be available in not just professional athletes, but your children's sports games as well, where you'll be able to use these exosomes. And exosomes are produced by pretty much, most cells, like not only mammalian, but also fungal and plant cells. So what Dr. Brent did was he isolated exosomes from the hemp plant, and lo and behold, those exosomes contain cannabinoids. So this is really, really exciting science. And I hope that this little blip gets you lit, Dr. Mark, and you start going out and reading a bunch of articles on this, because these exosomes, people have been studying them for probably about 20 to 30 years now, but it's getting
I'm not
exciting.
aware of it. So send me a link or something like that.
I can send you a ton of papers. I have about a dozen papers that I can send you on exosomes, and you will be very excited because, like I said, you can extract them from the cannabis plant, and they do contain cannabinoids in the exosomes. Exosomes are used for cells to communicate with one another. So and Dr. Brent's even under, the belief system now that a lot of the amazing work that is being done with stem cells are actually their exosomes that they're releasing to communicate. So everyone, there's your homework for the week. Exosome, E-X-O-S-O-M-E. They're membrane-bound extracellular vesicles that are produced in the endosomal compartment of most eukaryotic cells. And they're interesting. They're nanoscopic. They're like 20 to 80 nanometers, and they definitely break the blood-brain barrier. Nature.
Along with medicinal mushrooms. So let's make sure the medicinal mushrooms continue to be in the conversation when we're talking about blood.
They produce exosomes. They produce exosomes, and if you extract the exosomes from medicinal mushrooms, you'll find the medicinal compounds from those mushrooms in those exosomes. It's unbelievable. The system is perfect.
And they are bioavailable to our body immediately, and they help our body's receptors and neurology become more regenerative. They regenerate. If every cell in our body has 380 trillion pathogens in it, basically every single cell, which how many cells? 180 million. I forget how many cells are in the body, but every 180 trillion, right? Yeah. And then every one of those cells has 380 trillion pathogens in it. I mean, it really shows you that exosomes and when your body's exuding, it's because it's out of balance, and it allows those pathogens out of the cells. It creates an environment where that part of the cell can exude. And so that's why this health and well-being regimen, this nod to herbalism and mycology comes back in, because that group of people never got into chemicals, and they continued to walk that line of cellular regeneration and bioavailability to where your body doesn't have to, it can accept it. So that's why it's important. It's why it continues to show up at the table. It's why it continues to be part of the conversations, because it's natural to us and it helps ourselves. Kelly's been doing amazing work with athletes and trauma in mountain biking, and specifically downhill mountain biking, and with incredible fractures, incredible breaks, concussions, people hitting trees, rocks, and working with top athletes, which also have all kinds of sponsors that need them to do, 720s and backflips and trips and all the things. And, they can't be out for a whole summer. And so I would love, maybe Kelly will get into it, but, to bring in professional athletes is also a type of trauma. It's different than soldiers, of course, but it's trauma, quick trauma, fast, and it can really affect you for the rest of how many people have fallen, and for the rest of their life, they talk about this fall that, made it to where they can't do all this stuff,
Or a
play
car
soccer,
accident.
all whatever it is. And so if you actually deal with the trauma proper, you know, your body can rebalance. When you find the compounds that break the blood-brain barrier, then it allows your body to function at its organic chemistry higher level, higher self. And with that, I really appreciate and love you all. I have to go outside and do some work, some hand digging in the earth and stuff. So big love to all you all, and every fractal of knowledge that comes out of us, you know, is a positive one. A special big up to Wade Laughter. Haven't heard enough from you today, but just know every single day is a day that we are giving thanks for you and your journey on earth, brother. and everyone else in the world. Everyone else. Thank you so much. Blessed love.
Yeah, and Josh had mentioned I have been working with a lot of people with heavy duty brain trauma, and I also am a brain trauma, you know, I think an incredible success story. When I was 7 years old, I had a car accident that I lost my sight for a long period of time, and I was cross-eyed for 9 months. And it, you know, was not only an incredible concussion, but it broke my skull. So I have an opening in my skull. And then from that, I have suffered really tremendous, headaches. I don't really even, you know, it's beyond migraines. It's a migraine that goes beyond. And so when my brain has been looked at in a CAT scan or in any other MRIs, I have showings of maybe 1,000 different strokes in my brain. So I had the ability to either go totally natural, which is why a lot of where I'm coming from, and I'm really tried and true. And I work with several hundred patients right now. I call them gems. I don't even want to call people patients. I don't even feel like it's a practitioner or it's a this or it's a that or it's a seeker. It's just being human on this planet right now is traumatizing in and of itself. Being in a body is yet another traumatizing thing in and of itself, with all of the different toxins that it's getting and all of the different wars of different whatever, spiritual means, whatever you want to talk about, we're getting hit on all levels. So the reason why I'm going to continue to be the voice for nature is because I understand that in a way that I don't need to look towards other things. I understand that, of course, science is a representation of nature. Of course, science is a way for us to explain nature, but it's the misrepresentation of where science has to go to where then we have to correct it. Because Etienne, you're talking about so many important things. What you're talking about is compassion beyond, and yet I hear so many different dichotomies and fractures of science and war and industry has caused these ailments for then people to have to go and seek nature, to then go and seek more science, because people are utilizing what is registered and what is allocated by maybe the EPA or science to then try to get it out of them to then go back to nature, which is exactly what Val said. It's cyclical. And maybe cyclical starts with an S-I-C-K, because humans just tend to do that. And I think what we really can do is we can come together and have this beautiful understanding that all of the beautiful points of science that are truly trying to help us without monetary need, without the lobbying, without all of the government control, because community care, because what you're talking about with Etienne, and I know definitely, you know, that's where you're at with Mark. So I think that there's people on the planet who are utilizing these great knowledges for good, and then people who are utilizing these great knowledges just for money and profit to push forward a possible ego or competition. But really what it comes down to is that there are people who need to heal. And that is where we are going to reach the highest collective consciousness of all of us, because if we're all at that highest level of healing that we all understand, and we're all following that highest level of healing, that's where we're going to actually go to the next level. That's what we're all seeking. We're all seeking that. And I just wanted to say that, first of all, I appreciate everything that you all are doing, every single one of you, because, and I don't even mean just on this, anybody who's watching as well, because you're wanting to be better, because you want to be a gem on this planet who is making us all better. And I know I got caught off on a tangent there, but thank you all for listening. And mostly I'm just saying that I have a deep, deep, deep appreciation for all of you. And I just, thank you. Thanks for the tangent. I'm smoking good weed.
Love you, Kelly. Stoked to have you here.
What are you smoking on? Yeah, Bubble Man, we haven't asked this in a long time. What's everybody smoking on? I mean, I'm smoking on some rosin here myself here, so this is some tasty little squeeze. What about you, Mark?
I'm smoking on my own rosin. I'm smoking on my live hash rosin, some Snow God, 84% cannabinoids, 8.9% terpenes.
Nice.
I'm smoking on some beautiful Bubba Whip flower that just came off the hangers from this year, 2022. And obviously it's a really nice uplifting sativa with some really beautiful heady space. Thank you to the breeder of that. And I can't remember who it was.
And Etienne, I just wanted to say that when did you start doing your lab testing? Was that in 2008 or soon after?
We started in 2007, and I had to switch labs. So 2008 is when I really had a real lab, and I know you were doing it, decade before. But the lab we were doing with was in Berkeley. They were doing over testing for Novartis and Bayer, so they had 6 HVPLCs and like 4 gas chromatographs. So I knew that I had sound scientists who could at least, and then we brought Arno over to teach us the extraction, because back then it's $10,000 fine per test, right, if you're caught with cannabis in a laboratory. So he taught us to do this suspended solution. So we would take the 100% alcohol, shake the cannabis for grind it at an equal part, then put it into a tube, and then shake it for 1 minute, and then we would extract that, and then that solution then we would take to the laboratory, and then that's what we would do. That's what we would do 1,500 tests on between.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying is the parts were so low of the active ingredient, but in a measured amount, that you could use it for calibration of your GCs and HPLCs, but it wasn't illegal to have the standard. Yeah. Also, too, remember that when they first started testing in California and in the Netherlands also, more than 80%, closer to 85% of all of the samples tested had either pesticides, insecticides, and or mycotoxins. So yeah, protection for the consumer absolutely was needed.
Hey Sam, I have a question for you. When you and Rob were doing your work at Wart Farm, was there any sort of testing that was at your fingertips when you guys were doing that work, or was it hard to do that type of work? Or
no, we had a legally licensed lab. We had HPLC, a HCl prep, so for isolating small single amounts, gram amounts of a single cannabinoid, and we had GCFID for doing terpenes and cannabinoids also. I preferred a GC because when you smoke cannabis or vape it, you're actually destroying part of it. And when a GC does its work, it destroys part of this of the sample you put in. So it's closer to what people are actually consuming. Than HPLC will show, the acid and the neutral elements, but it doesn't really show what is being delivered to a person. Not that a GC is exactly the same as a person, but it's closer.
Well,
And
that
that's what we
assumes that you're
started with.
smoking it.
We started with
If
GCs, and
if
the
you're
problem
eating
was
it,
the
yeah, if you're eating
ignition
raw
was
cannabis.
coming up the machinery so badly that's why they gravitated toward the UV HPLCs, is because of the maintenance that was happening because of the turnover at the gas chromatographs because of the ignition.
No, so the HPLC is used so you can quantify plant material, and plant material is enriched with cannabinoid acids. What they often do is they just apply the correction to correct for after decarboxylation what the cannabinoid acid, which is measured this, produces this amount of cannabinoid. So they should have like either what's called a total THC or theoretical THC. But yeah, I mean, Sam, that's true that, what you smoke is what it goes up to GC. But I think for to be more precise on what is actually in the plant, and especially if you're doing native, like live resin extractions, or if you're making, again, really quality hash and turning it into rosin, really having the cannabinoid acid profile is going to give you a more complete understanding of what that oil actually is.
No, I agree absolutely with you, Mark, about HPLCs. But I'm just saying that if you want to know what happens, what the THC level that's being delivered to an average smoker in a joint, then a GC was actually more valuable to us for that one aspect.
Hey,
yeah,
Sam.
now there's an issue, and I don't know if you're dealing with this at all, Etienne, that there's this so-called thing called lab shopping, where producers are, again, going around to different labs and trying to get, the highest potency results that they can possibly get on large batches reproducibly, so they can have a more reliable, route to market without it, uncumbering, people trying to negotiate to lower prices. Because again, this is also just the pain of prohibition, I think, is that there is a downward pressure on producers to basically, I mean, again, the margin, especially if you look at a mature state like California, is the margins that you're seeing at the dispensary and distributor levels are certainly not equalized across the whole production supply chain. And certainly, I think, like, if you look at states that are rolling out new programs where you have vertically integrated organizations, where underneath one license or a group of licenses, you have cultivation, extraction, manufacturing, and dispensing. I know California inserts distribution, right? So those distributors can make a lot of money. But really, so my son, who's out in LA right now and doing really well, I mean, just to break into that market is really difficult, because you really need to have some kind of stratification through that distribution dispensing market to get enough volume to make your teeny weeny margin enough to pay the bills, right, Collin?
You're hitting it on the head, man. But it's but like, I also find it at what Marcus said earlier with spraying and IPM management. It's also on the farmer's end. They're looking for higher COAs too, so they can sell it into the market, because that helps them, right? Because there's this weird smoke and mirrors that TAC means something, right? And quality is not quantitated and qualitated through any of these numbers. So it's a glimpse of what's there in terms of weight and chemical classes, right?
This is the problem.
Yeah,
right?
The current issue right now that's led to this so-called phenomenon called lab shopping is that when you get bud at the dispensary, it's not dry. There's still moisture in it.
Right.
And so certainly, like, if you're looking at a COA and you're reporting potencies based on a dried weight basis. Dried weight means bone dry. That means no water. So you have to really have good technique to do the water activity measurement to understand what fraction of that cannabis as received at the dispensary, because it's not bone dry, right? It has moisture.
It has like 12. So, but Mark, here's where I'd argue through my journeys and even the last month where I had an issue, not even an issue, this is just how it went, where I sent a batch in, had 12% or 11% or 9% moisture, right? I sent it in, right? That was the R&D COA. They tested it, and they said that it had 12% moisture, and the TAC was actually higher than the lower moisture content one that they had sent me. And it was, again, these are apples and oranges. Before, it was the same lab, right? So same lab, same, same. So
even within a lab, it's statistically problematic to make comparisons because there's so much fucking variation here.
Correct.
And so what this really relies on is the fact that, okay, how to describe this quickly. So you have to do the water activity measurement, right? So actually there was a woman who gave a really good talk on this at the online cannabis symposium that I think is on YouTube. And I think she's also giving the American Chemical Society's Journal Club presentation this month. I think if you Google it, her name is Ginny, I think. And she gave a great talk on it and describes exactly what this phenomena is. And so what you need to do is when you're assessing potency and you're reporting it on it's different than dried weight, right? And Collin, this is really important. And again, goes to what Sam was saying, is that when they're determining the moisture content in a moisture balance, which is just a little mini oven that you put a sample on, it just weighs before and after. That's just, you heat it up, the water goes away. But what else happens? Terpenes go away.
Right.
Cannabinoids decarboxylate. So now you've totally changed everything. You no longer have the same denominator that you had when you started with that experiment. So
Mark, that's why we used to use a glass desiccator. So we leave it in it overnight with those blue crystals that turn
right.
That would get rid of.
It's got an indicator in there that tells you that
that would get rid of 99% of the moisture, not 100%, but as close as we could get in our lab in an easy way. And that's what we always did before we tested anything with our GC.
But Sam, the key thing is you're not heating it up, right?
No, we're not heating it up at all. Okay.
So when you're in a cannabis testing lab and you have hundreds of samples, do you think you can wait for desiccator? So again,
no,
what this woman showed is that you could just do a room temperature vacuum desiccation. And even at that room temperature vacuum desiccation, you're still losing a big chunk of terpenes, but you're not doing the cannabinoid decarboxylation. And it turns out, again, when you're testing something and you're in the 20% regime of cannabinoids, total cannabinoids, that amount of CO2 is significant. So when you decarboxylate it, and again, this is going back to the original discussion about using gas chromatography, which is when you decarboxylate it, you've chemically altered the plant. There's no other way of saying it. I know what you're saying, Sam, that while you're smoking it when you're decarboxylating it, but if someone's using it as like a tincture, or if I know some people who are now putting live rosin into gummies and they taste delicious. They taste like the rosin from which they were derived, man. They taste really good. So I don't think there's any decarboxylation. I think it's just raw rosin going into the gummy itself.
No, they're decarbs.
They are decarbed?
Yeah, you decarb the patties, and then you can drop that and do whatever you need to. But
okay. But I don't know if you agree with me, Collin. I mean, I think I like seeing the HPLC data because the HPLC data show me what that flower contains. certainly the GC data is cool, and that's what you need for like a headspace
Yeah.
measurement for terpenes.
No, I think anytime you have more data to compare against itself and pit against itself, as you know, the 10% variance in each state is also a problematic aspect that gets tacked onto all these things. Like Colorado, for instance, is a really, it's just kind of confusing, to be honest, in terms of how they calculate milligram serving. So because there's a denominator that they have to do math on to get that actual, milligram serving that they believe is in your product. So if you test for, say, 85%, there's a 10% variance that gets tacked onto that knocks it down to 70, maybe below 70, maybe 68, right? So
there's a reason why we had a HPLC and a GC and an HCLP prep, because that allowed us to isolate several grams of a single cannabinoid. And it was really important to have all three of those. But what we used the most actually was GCFID, especially for terpenes. That was our go-to tool.
I just put in
the big ethical problem that we found when we started to do testing was exactly the whole problem that we're talking is because we realized also the majority of those original 1,500 tests that the majority of them were very chemically close together. And what we realized is that there was going to be a perception that THC percentage was somehow going to matter to people. And we knew that that was not the real case here. And unfortunately, Harborside decided to flood it out as we were deciding the ethical realities, because it is still prevalent. If people think along the lines of alcohol that it's just because it's a high number, I must be getting more fucked up and must be getting more of the sensation and more of that feeling, whereas we know it's a symbiotic relation, that ensemble effect of the terpenes, diterpenes, sesquiterpenes, and everything ingested together that are giving that effect. And so this is the thing that's also missing for that nasal spray is, of course, it's THC dominant, but it needs all the other spectrum added to it.
The easiest way to understand that, Etienne, is if you smoke 100% pure THC, it does not get you high as pure cleaned up resin of skunk number 1 that's only 50, 60, 70% of THC at the most. But the resin gets you higher.
Agreed.
By weight.
But we didn't understand in 07, 08 the terpenes and all of that, because we were still quantifying the THC and then finding that secondary spike, which was CBD. So this is also the understanding we've been able to gain as we were able to strike, all right, this off the map. And so it opened up these other opportunities to where now we're testing CBG, CBGA, and all the other acid precursors, and are understanding and finding our newer ones, because now science can play and we've checked off that list. Now we have to continue to add to that list, but also add to our understanding of why it matters, because science is still not replicating what the plant is producing, right? Nobody's been able to take a terpene recipe and make it exactly what comes off of a plant. And the first one that does is going to be pretty amazing when they do, but no one's come even close. Have you found
that's because they're not using the other volatile organic compounds that are present in the profile. They just are thinking about terpenes.
There are other volatiles, but besides that, they're not using all of the 150 terpenes which are found in cannabis. They might be using 10 of them or 20 of them, but the average terpene, we were able to find about 50 or more terpenes. And we only had maybe 100 or 120 of the terpenes to do our testing with. So there was terpenes that we didn't have, which even if they're there in tiny, tiny amounts, I mean, terpenes are there in tiny amounts to start with, and yet they really have an incredible effect. The right terpenes can definitely make cannabis more potent and modulate the effects in a major way.
Yeah, the issue is that when you're talking about a commodity, any commodity, any commodity where large scale manufacturing, third-party testing and production is happening. There could be some ways, some metrics of basically testing for quality. And yeah, Etienne, I kind of hear what you're saying about, you know, THC percentage. I think of also like the psychology of the dispensary buyer, and when they go to buy a product, they you know, okay, they can look at the product, they can smell it, but what's its THC percentage or THCA percentage if they know what they're talking about, right? And so it's just, again, a metric. Maybe it's not the right metric, but it is a metric. And when you're talking about, say, buying large quantities of plant material, and you have, I don't know, 50 kilos at, you know, 14%, but you have 50 kilos, 18%, you know, which one are you going to, you know, I think that there's a business mentality there, but also like, if you're in our business where you're extracting, well, that now the THC percentage makes a big deal. You know what I've seen now, and I've seen this on a couple different COAs where, you know, the plant makes cannabinoid acids, but obviously the dispensary or the COA is going to report that total THC number. Well, I think what people do to up their THC numbers is they spray distillate. There's a lot of like spraying and dipping and all that kind of shit going on these days. Shit, they're putting what HHC distillate now onto hemp and selling HHC flower, which totally doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
So now that there's that infrastructure that, okay, we can just take a distillate, we could just do that on the samples we send off for testing. The thing about that is that here's where HPLC makes a difference, because if you're testing flower, you're going to see those cannabinoids as cannabinoid acids. If they're spraying with THC distillate, that's been decarboxylated. So you'll see a THC peak that will come out, and we'll be like, well, total THC is, you know, 25%, because we add the THC that's existing with the THCA. Now, granted, there is some, you know, adventitious decarboxylation that just happens after harvesting. But you guys know as well as I know that, you know, we all like fresh material. And I think part of that freshness is exactly what you're saying, Sam. There's that whole underlying symphony of terpenes, and even, you know, they're not necessarily terpenes, but they're terpenoids, I'd call them, because like those prenolated sulfides, which that group out in Oregon has now, you know, basically used a volatile sulfur detector to detect, are the skunky essence of cannabis, prenol sulfides and the disulfide of prenol sulfide. And so they now have actually a method that they're using at testing labs to assign the gassiness of a strain based on the detection of these volatile sulfides. And Marcus, we had that dude on Church, right? Before they published their paper, that guy came on Hash Church, because I remember that was the first time we had that conversation, I think.
What was his name?
Yeah, he was talking about thiols.
Yeah, the thiols.
Nick.
That's
Nick.
right. That guy.
Yeah, cool.
Well,
Nick's awesome.
the professor,
he's coming back for sure.
Yeah, there's a professor there, and he's involved in the American Chemical Society subdivision. And I've met him at a couple meetings since we had that discussion on Church. And yeah, so they basically have a gas, you know, scale of gassiness, of how gassy your weed or your hash is, based on the detection of these volatile sulfides. And again, that's a recent discovery, just with like in the last 2 years, right? I mean,
Max and his team at Abstract, they're the ones who kind of discovered it, right? And wrote that
Right.
paper.
Well, keep in mind, Nick discovered it about 20 years ago. So when that paper came out, he did chuckle to himself a few times.
Got it.
Nick Ziegler.
yeah, but they
If I remember, he did it in hops.
Yeah,
he did it in hops.
right.
He discovered 1,400 different thiols in hops with that very machine that Mark is talking about. And it's like some ridiculously like 1 to the trillion or something. Like it was, he came on and he explained it.
I think they found 5 or so in cannabis so far. And one of them is suspected of being much stronger smelling than all the rest. I've got several of the files here, but nobody has
Of course
proven
you
yet.
do.
Yeah, I asked if they can do the terp profile of dog shit, because
So what I want to do is I want to know,
Bring it
do the
back.
files contribute to potency or modulation of THC?
I'm sure they do. Don't you think, Sam? I'm
No,
sure they
you
do.
can't assume that. Most of the terpenes don't.
Oh, but I'm sure what they do is they modulate in that they help create, and I've said this before on church before, and I think there is references out in the literature, it just increases the fluidity at the membrane, at a cell membrane. So terpenes help exchange stuff across the cell membrane. And I think what happens in that, Sam, and it might be adventitious, is that there are things that now come into the cell that upregulate cannabinoid receptor expression. And I think part of the entourage effect is that upregulation of the cannabinoid receptors that has to happen. That happens with full spectrum extracts. That just doesn't happen with the single.
Like beta caryophyllene, like kind of diminishes your THCA effects,
Yeah, I think so. And what we basically did was took 25 milligrams of absolutely 100% pure THC. We weighed these, put them in a volcano with the tiniest spike of a single terpene, and we went through about 15 of the different terpenes, the top ones, and some of them definitely potentiated, more of them modulated, but all of them did not do things. And like you say, caryophyllene, I felt was negative.
Yeah, there's a few that do that. So it's interesting. Linalool might be actually one of them as well, I find.
Well, caryophyllene is known to be a CB2 agonist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it acts as basically a cannabinoid, and there's been this discussion about calling it a cannabinoid because the people who found that out call it a dietary cannabinoid, beta caryophyllene, because it's in, a black pepper. Ooh,
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, I think there's all kinds of new recent data on that kind of like fleshes out some of the entourage effect, because they're finding not only more compounds in cannabis extract that contribute to the overall biological effect, but they're discovering new receptors that these things are hitting. So they're learning more and more and more. When I say we, I mean collectively, us scientists and everyone, the whole human race. I mean, we do have a crystal ball. It's called the scientific literature. And, science is a fascinating subject for kids to learn and to be fascinated in. There's all kinds of fascinating. When you have a microscope and you have a kid, you have a whole day of activity, man. There's all kinds of things. But I just want to go back and say one other thing. So this is, again, talking about some of the things that these minor cannabinoids are doing.
Your mic's hot, Nick.
I'm sorry?
Your mic is hot. It's not muted. I was just letting you know I could hear some sounds come through.
Oh,
and welcome. We're talking about files. So I thought I'd invite you in because you're one of the guys that opened that. You were the guy that opened that conversation up with me. And so, yeah, Dr. Mark, if you want to catch him up. The question really is, do they modulate?
Yeah, there you go. Ask that question. So the discovery of these sulfur compounds that you guys have found, and now I met with Ian in that group at the APS meeting where they were looking at the so-called gas factor and assigning gas factor based on the quantification of these volatile sulfides. So yeah, there was just a question on because I think Sam and other people are again discussing about different compounds that modulate the effects of cannabinoids. Is it known whether or not
Nick is the co-party who sent me my terpenes.
Who did you get them from?
What's that? Who said what?
I'm sorry, that's Nick. This is Nick. Which party did you get them from?
What's the name of the lab? Abraxas, or I'm afraid I can't remember the name of the lab that where they were sent. Well, yes, that's correct.
Abstract.
Gotcha. No, actually, I have not been working with them, but I've communicated with them on some of their research and some of what they're doing. I think some of their claims are a little bit broad, but it's they're definitely doing some good work. A lot of people in the space are.
Well,
whether it's
they were the only people I was able to obtain the pure thiols from, and I need to do the work, but I'm having a little bit of trouble getting pure THC. So until I get the pure THC, I can't do the thiol work.
Where are you based?
Amsterdam.
Oh, okay. Let me see what I can do. I can see if I can find you some fun stuff. And just you've got my email on here, so go ahead and shoot me your address.
All of the terpenes are legal here. I mean, the cannabinoids are legal in Holland, except for Delta 9 and Delta 8. All the rest of them are, and maybe even Delta 8 might be legal, I forget. But Delta 9 is not legal. So you can't buy grams.
Delta 9 THCA, is that legal?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
What is what legal?
THCA.
THCA. No, that's not legal, because all you have to do is heat it up and it turns into THC. So of course that's not legal.
Okay. In any case, I'll see if I can find somebody from the medical space. They might have some. So, but when you asked about
speaking of standards, I just wanted to mention too, when we were talking about standards and labs before, that one of the big problems when we first started, because we started our lab more than 2 decades ago, was the problem that when you would order analytical standards from SAGMA or from the United Nations drug people, that when we would test them on our HPLC, we would find they weren't as stated. So if you calibrate your machines according to what they say they are, without checking yourself, then what you find out is that all of your results are skewed and not correct.
Yes, and so what's one of the things that we found as well is that a lot of these. Sorry, guys, a lot of crosstalk here. Sorry, I'm in the Delta Lounge. A lot of the standards are actually, and especially for thiols and thioates, because they're kind of tricky to analyze. We found that you needing a sulfur chemoluminescence detector array is really one of the things that drives up your accuracy. And then the other issue is that there hasn't been a tremendous amount of research done into them, and so the bands are not as narrow for what they're saying. So they're clustering a lot of things together, and so you actually see things like 4-MMP is listed as being this one very important thiol in aromatics, and in reality, the standard we use is actually covering several isomers as well as some other compounds that are right next to it. And so in terms of purity, that's the indicator thiol, or that's the indicator that they use, the thiols and thioates that are in that region, but it's not necessarily specific to that one thiol. Alternatively, there's the other issue is that it's hard to disassociate them together from each other without some extremely high performance chromatography systems. And we were still working on that before I left Yakima Chief. Getting the accuracy and the precision down was challenging at best.
To be honest, it was that way with the cannabinoids when we started in the 90s. When we built our first lab, there was no way to separate really without really specialized columns, which were rare and expensive, CB, C and CBD. So everybody was co-elucidating all of those together and reporting them as one peak instead of, in fact, they were 2 peaks.
Exactly. And then the other tricky aspect is that, especially if you're using GCMS, the sulfur compounds, like most of the detectors don't like them, so you need to have a separate detector for them. And even then, it's really just a method development that has to continue because there aren't a lot of established methods. Agilent has been working with us and improving public access to those methods, so it's a good thing. But we're still a couple years out from getting it really nailed down.
That's the reason why we never looked at thiols, because we had no way to determine the thiol percentages or anything else in our lab. We wished we could, but there was no way, so we didn't try.
That, and not only that, the best detectors are actually they're good at detecting and good at isolating, but they're not very good at quantitation. So it's a challenge all the way around. David, you said something earlier about what's known about the sort of the co-effects and the impact, and whether or not they sort of potentiate or they interfere with. And really, that research hasn't yet been done. I was just speaking to Ethan Russo last week about this. He's very interested in it as well. So I'm going to try to see if I can set some sort of studies up with everybody. But what, to me, from an evolutionary perspective, Jesus, having had trouble talking this morning, sorry, is it makes sense that there would be some sort of neurological impact, because they're so important in human evolution and mammalian evolution in general. Looking at the way that they predict ripening, and they predict fermentation, and they also predict putrescence. Those are three very important survival tools for mammals. And it's one thing that's really interesting I found is that if you know what durian is, it's a very sort of stinkiest fruit in the world, they call it. It's extremely high in 3-MH and 4-MMP, as well as some other thioates and pentane thioates that are kind of more the gassy garlic, diesely nastiness in very high quantities, or when they're high proportions. The tigers, who are obligate carnivores, will make their way to a durian tree and defend it because they like the durian so much. It's got a lot of protein, it's got a lot of fat in it as well. But the fact that they're able to detect those thiols and they use it as a source of food for an obligate carnivore is pretty impressive.
Well, I'm very curious. I also used to be curious in flavonoids, because I know that they can modulate and potentiate things, but orally they can. But if you smoke them, it deactivates them. So the flavonoids are not responsible for the smoked different effects in cannabis. For orally, that could be a completely different story. But,
100%.
There's an awful lot of terpenes that really have no effects. I mean, they don't get you high. Excuse me, I'm not talking medical here. I'm talking recreational.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing with the cannabinoids. Most of the cannabinoids do not get you high.
Yeah, they do have an impact on the sort of CB1, CB2, as well as the other receptors, and they have an impact on modulating, say, for example, your gut health.
Some of them certainly do. Prime example is the way CBD will delay the onset, reduce the peak experience, and make the whole thing last longer for THC.
And well, as an example, so not just CBD, but like looking at say piperine and beta-caryophyllene, is the impact that has. There's the old adage, like, if somebody's having a bad trip or having an adverse reaction to THC and they're kind of having an anxiety issue, give them a teaspoon or tablespoon of black pepper to munch on, and it pretty much nerfs it very quickly. And the mechanism is not understood, but it seems to be the case of anecdotal experiences driving research, and it's really exciting to see that sort of stuff start to happen.
Well, for years I've been trying to get too high on THC products, but so far I've been pretty unsuccessful.
And just for conversation, I would love to bring in, there's a lot of people out there who, the more that the plant is concentrated, the less high that they get. So I've talked with Ethan Russo at length about this. And at first it was like, no, that's not possible. But yes, it is. There's a lot of people who don't get high off of a dab at all. And maybe a little bit of hash, they really don't feel the effects. So the more natural that it is, or the more flower or joint, or maybe out of a bong that it is, they would be, getting a higher effect. And what was brought up conversation after, a couple of years at length, brings the entourage effect back into the conversation without having to elude it. So
the amino acids are destroyed during vaporization or smoking. So like in terms of edibles, you can certainly get some of those, but in general, they are destroyed by smoking.
Yeah, like the flavonoids.
Yep, and the polyphenols.
Well, there seems to be something that's happening when, you know, the more raw that people, whether it's even combusting, whether it's an edible, you know, people that are getting more effects off of an edible, even if it is in butter. And I hear and I understand that the amino acids are alive there, but there's something that's happening for a lot of people that need the more raw compounds, even if it's decarboxylated, even if it's heated up. So that's a conversation that we don't understand yet. And I'd love to hear what you all think about.
Could it be as simple as when you take cannabinoids, THC especially, orally, then you don't get high on the THC, you get high on the 11-hydroxy after it goes through the liver. And so what reaches the brain and the blood is not THC, it's primarily 11-hydroxy, which is a bit stronger in effects than THC and a bit different. So it could be.
Would that be the same with decarboxylation or, you know, heating up at any temperature? Would that be the same? No.
The liver actually, the liver actually converts the delta 9 into 11-hydroxy. And with like sort of going into that's sort of an interesting thing. So anecdotally, some people don't have the enzymes, the liver enzymes or functionality to process some of the THC into the bioactive form from oral consumption. And it depends on the form that it comes in. As an example, I've consumed upwards of 300 milligrams of delta 8 orally and had zero effect. Whereas, you know, a vape instantly affects me. It is definitely very, very much lighter than delta 9. But orally, for some reason, my body doesn't process the material. My cousin, he has the same thing with delta 9. He can consume just insane quantities of delta 9 edibles, and he gets no effect from them at all. And you know, this needs to be studied more, but I suspect that there's probably some gene deletes or some enzyme deletes in different people to explain that. But when you're talking about sort of the overall,
it is that way for alcohol. American Indians don't have the gene.
And yep.
All sorts of drugs.
Trace migration by that. There's a really interesting, but the point you're bringing about the whole sort of full spectrum material is, I think, salient. I think that the total quantity of all the material in working together will give you a different effect. And so, as an example, I'll go back to the pure THC. Like pure THC beverages do almost nothing to me. They do get me like sort of instantly intoxicated, and then it's a very thin, very narrow experience. I don't get I don't get sort of the relaxation. I don't get the enjoyment of it as much, and it's not just from the aroma and flavor of it, but it's the combination of everything. So I 100% agree that the full spectrum material is a quantifiably different experience, and it's certainly a qualitatively different experience than isolates. And that's similar for anything. Like a good cup of coffee is significantly more enjoyable and is going to give you a different impact, whether it be psychosocial or not, psychological or not, than just a fingertip of caffeine. It is different. I think that the complexities of those interactions are very, very difficult to disentangle and study. And the typical approach of doing, one compound plus one modulator is where we need to start doing this research, but we really need to start looking at significantly more complicated and probably significantly more complicated arrangements of all of these compounds. And instead of doing sort of additions, doing deletes from a sort of full spectrum mix. So you say, okay, we've got a full spectrum that's completely quantified. We know what everything that's in it. Now let's remove one of those fractions at a time and see what the result is. It's going to take, probably decades to complete that research, because all of the possible combinations. And some would say, rightly, that it's probably not worth doing because of the amount of time and math
It's worth doing, Nick. We got to do it. We got to find out because it's
it's maybe a million different combinations you're talking about.
It's true.
I would say trillions.
Yeah.
Okay. Every person is different.
And every person is different.
Yeah.
AI will help.
Let's go subjective.
So Nick and Sam, still getting to that question, do you think that I would just love maybe even to marinate on it and get back to me or what you all think, but just that idea that people who can feel effects off of, say, a joint or, you know, any other raw form, but as soon as it's concentrated or the more that it's concentrated, even whether it's rosin, even whether it's from a full spectrum plant, it's just the actual idea of concentrating those cannabinoids. What's being left out that the person no longer has effects?
And so I think that's the key point. It's not about the level of concentration, it's about the exclusion of other components. And I think that's a very, very important distinction to make, is that it's not necessarily the concentration is the problem. It's that the elimination of any of the compounds that will provide an attendant experience is what's going to be driving that. And
oh,
go ahead.
Excuse me, Nick, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say was that what we found was that the other materials in the plant did not contribute to you getting higher, but the resin heads, they did. So if you just cleaned up the resin heads and made them so that they were like 99% resin heads with nothing else, I found that got me higher than anything else. Absolutely.
And again, tolerance is an issue here, and it's subjective. But I think that in general, from all of the research that I've done and all of the work that I've been doing, and obviously the work Marcus has been doing with hash and bubble hash and cleaning those up, we see that the vast majority of effects do come from those resin heads. That's not to say that there aren't other compounds in the other material that won't change that experience, but that the vast majority of the sort of recreational interest is concentrated, and medical interest is concentrated in the resin heads, except when it comes to things like you mentioned, the amino acids and the proteins, as well as the polyphenol groups and the flavonoids, which are a huge group, and they're starting to be studied. But it's complex to study them. Those you're only going to get an effect from in edible form.
Yeah,
through oral consumption, just because of the nature.
Flavonoids are very important for a lot of people, but I was really, really focused on just the recreational focus. And once I found out that when you smoke flavonoids, it deactivated them, then I did not focus on them anymore.
That was the end of that.
They thermally degrade. They thermally degrade. They don't volatilize, and that's
they just turn to ash.
Yeah, that's the problem with the spice cannabinoids too. The synthetic cannabinoids is that they don't cleanly vaporize, right? They thermally degrade.
Earlier, when you said the exclusion of components, is it always the exclusion of components, or are there different genetic makeups that have blind spots in some form or another where they can't experience these?
100%. So so in both the plant and the person. There are like human beings have anosmias, and there are certain people that simply like have a very low sort of aroma sensitivity, and so it's interesting, and that's actually they would almost be a perfect candidate for study of effects because that would eliminate their subjective enjoyment aspect of it. Does that make sense? Like by choosing people that can't detect aromas, we would actually be able to see.
Doing it both ways, Nick, where you eliminate one thing at a time, and then eliminate two things at a time, and then three. And you also do it the way we did it, which was we had 25 milligrams of THC, and we spiked it with a single terpene, then another single terpene, then another single terpene, and smoked them on different days so that we could evaluate what they did. We were primarily looking for ones that potentiated, and if they modulated, wanted to know how.
Exactly. I would love to talk about more about this, and there's some groups that I'd like to possibly bring into this conversation at some point, because it's really, I think it's fascinating, and I think the implications are huge for the recreational market as well as for therapy as medicine. And I think that it's one of those things where we need to move away from the dogma of single compound, single effect into the compounding effects of multi. Finally well-managed ADHD, and cannabis is certainly a part of that, is that the combination of multiple salts, of amphetamine salts, is more effective than the single primary component. And this is one of the big things that a lot of sort of analytical chemistry and just Western medicine and science in general has struggled with, is the focus on principal component analysis, which is that we say that
vitamin C is the same way. I mean, vitamin C, if you make it synthetically, it works, or natural pure vitamin C works. But if you take vitamin C and you extract it from plant sources and you're getting the other associated compounds with it, it's more effective.
And I think that the focus on honestly, and this is for ease of analysis, on just looking at what makes up 90 or 95% of the compound, is like that gets you into the, not even the ballpark, but into the city of where the ballpark is located for what's really driving all these effects. And it is a very important shortcut to take, but it also, once you've identified those, like what are the most, like the key components that drive the most of the effects, you need to start branching out and looking at all of the attendant components that come with it, and why whole spectrum, full spectrum extracts or plants are more effective than single compound dosage. And it's not true for everything. And that's important to realize. But I think that in this case, there is enough evidence that we should really start looking into this in great detail.
Other research that I've always found really interesting is, why are some varieties of cannabis ceilingless? By that I mean, no matter how much you smoke, you always get higher when you smoke another joint or another pipe or another dab of that material. Whereas some materials, you smoke, and then you get to the point where it'll kind of make you more stoned, but it won't make you more high. And I don't know about everybody else, but I want to get higher.
And this is something that coming from my background, I love the community around it, but gets me a little bit wonky sometimes is the use of terms like high versus stone versus heady versus like body buzz, all those things, like trying to define, and this is also because I'm very particular about terms, but trying to define those in a way that gives us a sort of a shared understanding that is quantifiable, that we can track it and we can trace it and analyze it across different users and different strains is really important. But again, this may be me being just a little bit more picky. And what you said earlier about certain strains, and that was the other side of this, the genetics of people that are sort of anosmia, but there are also strains that simply don't, like there are chemovars, let's focus on the proper terms, there are chemovars that don't express the same cannabinoids, and they don't express the same aromatic balance. That's why we're interested in all of these different sort of the different strains and these different cultivars. And using those as using that variability as a feature rather than a bug is what I like to do. Is like, let's celebrate the variation in between people and plants, because we can then create blends of these things that do everything we want, and you could tune them, which I'm really excited by. Is taking the components that we want and then from different strains and combining them to create something that is not sort of expressed in the natural genetics of the plant.
As a plant breeder, I'm very interested in knowing what it is that people prefer and why, so that I can breed a plant that's tailored for that.
Exactly. What's interesting is I've been doing a lot of accessions or studies of different chemovars, and working with Jeremy Plum. I wish he was on this call because he'd start laughing right now. Is the terpinolene dominance that we're seeing in the U.S. Market, recreational and hemp, is massive, and the point where like we're seeing a potential loss of genetic diversity because people are selecting so heavily for that terpinolene dominance, because it applies it actually, or not actually, it lifts up the citrus, it lifts up the tropical, and it lifts up the diesel and gassy character so well that, and piney as well, that it seems like we might be sort of selecting ourselves into a corner with breeding stock. And so I think it's really important to not just go for what people currently want, but to also look at what we see there are sort of attend with those, or not attend, that follow those clear customer preferences. And so we know that terpinolene is very, very exciting for a lot of people, and that's people judge their butter, say, oh, that smells amazingly gassy and citrusy. Great, but maybe they like something that has a lot more tropical character and a lot more of the burnt rubber and guava character that comes from the thiols. Just to bring it full circle here, and making sure that we can protect those genetics so that breeders like yourself can combine them and produce something that has both.
People have often asked me, what is the best? And I say, what do you mean by best? Do you mean the strongest, the best tasting, the best? What do you mean by the best? Because without understanding what they mean by the best, there is no single best cannabis for everybody. It just isn't that way.
Or for every situation.
There also needs to be a germplasm institute to protect all the genetics so that there can be biodiversity of what Nick is talking about, yet protecting and breeding the other, characteristics that are still there that people have come to know and love. And the problem is those don't exist domestically, and they don't exist in Canada at this time. So we need to start thinking about something like that so we can protect it, because this genetic tattoo on my arm is gone well over a decade, and it was one that helped many patients that I wish had been saved, but it's gone from the face of the earth. So I think Nick, you bring up a very real point that we have to be protecting the genetics that we have, but also the biodiversity that exists so that in future generations can understand, much less appreciate.
Yeah, I think
it's
people
kind
need
of
to...
hard. It's
Sorry,
kind of hard, Etienne, because to maintain a germplasm, for example, let's say you have just one landrace. Every time you reproduce that landrace, to not lose genes from that gene pool, you've got to have a minimum of 1,000 males and 1,000 females every reproduction. And those 1,000 males, they can't be clones all the same male. They've got to be from seed, 1,000 males, 1,000. Then you limit your loss to really, really a small percentage. But the only place that's really done is in third world countries. People aren't growing thousands and thousands of plants from seeds in the commercial cannabis world. It's very seldom done. It can be done, but it's not.
You hear that, hash churchers? You've got work to do. Get on it.
We've got a lot of work. Yeah, and I think it's what Sam is saying is like, I think it's important for people to keep running genetics and continue those lines and not move on so fast, and try to keep those lines in existence, in seed form. And that's one thing I think that, at least commercially, in terms of seeds, I don't see at all. I used to really respect, the individuals that had 10 lines. That was it. And that's that every year, that was it. And then they'd maybe introduce 1 or 2 new lines, but not whole revisions and, whole new drops of just completely different things from clone.
Most of the seed companies in the world can't even maintain clones for 20, 30 years for seed production. So if you can't lose clones, how are you going to save varieties?
So Sam, back in like the 90s, when like Ben Donker, like you were you created you were there, right? So at what time did those mother plants start to be really difficult to obtain? Was it like the late 80s, late 90s? Like, what was it difficult the whole time? Like,
obtain them from who, from where? I don't understand the question.
How long did you, basically, when did people like Sensi start losing their mother plants to,
probably from day one.
From day one.
Yeah, I mean, if you keep a plant as a clone and you keep it virus free, so keep the pests away, and it doesn't pick up more viruses, which will cause it to be lose vigor and vitality, and I didn't see any difference between clones 30 years later if you kept them clean, safe, and secure.
And that's actually something that's becoming a very large challenge right now because of the amount of unregulated growth that's going around, and people are showing, the cuts and all that stuff. The one of the ways to do that is actually through tissue culture, because you can actually preserve certain cells that don't have the virus yet, and you can grow it from that.
Companies like Segra and Power Plant are doing this for the community.
Yeah, there's a lot of
hop latent viroids.
Oh yeah, and this from my experience in the hop industry, it's a big problem. And it's not a problem for hops as much, but for if you're growing cannabis near them, or if they're processing the same facility, there needs to be very, very good phytosanitary controls. One of the things that, going back to the sort of the preservation of genetics, one of the things that I've done in my own breeding and curation is to try to always seed out genetics that I like for whatever particular reason. And I always keep the seeds of, the sort of the crosses that I'm not too happy about, because there might be something that pops up in them. I've got some genetics that have abhorrent agronomic characteristics. So they're terrible. They're spindly. They're incredibly mite sensitive. One of the things I really do breed for is powdery mildew resistance and downy mildew resistance, because I just don't like fungal infections in my bud. But I actually do run sort of mite stress tests on mine. So if you ever go into when I'm in a breeding session, you go into towards the end of it, everything's covered in mites, and I'm just trying to see which ones survive best. But that's a risky category. Most people don't want to do that. I understand why, but it's a fun thing for me.
Come on, tell the truth, Nick. You say you did that. The truth of it is, you just can't get rid of the little boogers.
No. I introduced them. I actually drove somewhere with a spider mite infestation in a hop field, took some and put it into my mite tent, which is inside another tent, which is
my mite tent.
And have you found plants which were mite resistant and didn't get mites?
Yes.
Why? Do you think?
I don't know why.
Terpenes?
It's very possible that it's I would say that it's likely that it's something to do in the aromatic profile, but also that their immune response is probably quicker.
I have grown millions of plants in my life, Nick, and I've grown thousands of different land races of cannabis. I have never seen a plant that could not get mites.
Okay, so there's not getting mites, and then there's resisting mites at the load that it's currently affecting other plants, and so they were always together in the same tent, and so the mites might go to other plants over this particular cross.
I've seen it myself. I've seen it with the Congo.
I've seen lower levels
in a room. Yeah, exactly. Way lower levels though. Like 90% were on the crop, and maybe like 10% or less were on this other plant.
And speaking of resistance and susceptibility, those important mildew papers came out where they found both genes for susceptibility and genes for resistance. And they found out that it's more important to not have the susceptibility genes than it is to have the resistance genes to avoid mildew in your plants.
Hey, speaking of resistance, Brian, you're working in a climate, I think, that is more challenging than anyone here. And you've been breeding for years, and, like I have, and on the East Coast we have a tremendous amount of rain. Like today's a great example. We're in the thick of a tropical event, that's just been broken up.
Yeah,
So,
it's
how's it
challenging.
going
It's
up there?
sunny up here today. It's sunny up here today, but it's really windy, which isn't bad. The land I have here is opened up for good air drainage, airflow. But yeah, this is interesting. I was going to bring it up or ask anyone that if they've seen any resistance, to botrytis from the limonene group. I've seen the lemon oriented types, and I can't break down the science in terms of the breakdown for the family of terpenes, the profile, but I've seen things in the lemon category be very resistant into the later season for botrytis and resistance. And then I've seen this year, out of a whole list of types, I've actually seen only powdery mildew pop up late season on the gas mask pheno number 6 back cross one. And which is ironic because the mom doesn't show that. So it's something reached out and is not resistant in it. But otherwise, it's not bad. It came in late, and everything else very, very clean. And I've been breeding like 5 years back here towards that. So it shows with mildew being a challenge, but I found it to be a challenge, cultivar specific, strain specific more. And yeah, so kind of leaning off of things that might go that way. And I'm finding definitely in Maine that more that the fruit forward cookie back type, still kind of working with that complex of genetics with some other tie-in. I've got a whole list of some exploration this year, which I can list off some strains that I'm working with, since if that is interesting to anyone.
Yes, please.
I was trying to breed
Sounds like there's
against
some science
botrytis.
happening here.
I was trying to breed against botrytis also. I was trying to do it in skunk number 1. And I grew several years, and it was so difficult that I gave up. But it definitely could be, because if you think about it, I never see botrytis in a variety like Original Haze. So
You know,
I'm
and
working with
I really wonder what comes down, because Brian, I really want to hear your strain list, and I just wanted to add.
Yeah,
I
and
really
there's
wonder what
people that want to hear it.
Yeah, and we also created 40 new varietals, and everything that we did this year was off of seed, and I think we did about 1,300 plants, all from seed, all our old varietals, and then mixing in some others. But I'm wondering too, wanted to bring it into the conversation that maybe more than having to do with varietals, because we've been growing in this area for so long, we've been adding to our soil for so long, we've been getting it right for so long. We only do seed varietals. We'll keep our clone, we'll keep a mother, maybe only because we've grown it out from that year or something, but normally we'll just continue to grow seeds. And I've just realized that now it's not really mattering what varietal that we are working with, if we've been working with it for a long time, because I think then that involves the endophytic relationship within the plant that then goes into the seed. Because I think if you're building something that's super resistant, you're building it through biology as well, which hasn't necessarily been a part of this conversation up till now. Yes, I think varietals are part of it. Yes, I think terpenes can maybe draw more interesting things from the air. Higher lactic acid is drawn to more, limonene varietals. I've noticed that also, Brian. But the endophytic reaction. So now it really seems like anything new that we bring onto our property is what's going to get, some kind of a reaction, have some type of a malady in it. And then it takes us several years to then work with it. And then now we're getting to the point where we are having hardly any, we live in an incredibly difficult environment. It's super cold up here. We're in an inland rainforest. And this year we didn't have hardly any botrytis, and that's in stalk and bud, in early and late. And it just sort of goes on and on. But the ones that we did have the problems with were the ones that were early. And Brian, I want to roll right over to you, because I'd love to hear your list.
Oh, well, we've had a great success summer too for health, actually, and have really not seen much of any botrytis. Really into this later finish, we're kind of a better cold Maine, sunny and breezy finish this year, so that helps. But the health is really up. And I would share one strain I saw that was interesting is from Dominion Seed Co. from Duke Diamond. It's a local skunk. I don't know how much skunk one it has in there, but I was going to let Sam know that that one was actually a resistant and a reparative strain, where I say it cracked down the middle even with some support and did a little quick bind job. And it came back late season where it looked like it was about to die off, and it had great resistance repair, which I've seen with hemp, but not as much with cannabis. And then it's got no mold. There's no mold, no botrytis, no septoria. And that's an old scratch pile compost that had actually a sour best shit ever with a Romulan called Candy Coated that took some septoria pretty hard, like almost the hardest in the yard. Picked clean leaf, killed the spore colony or tried to, and it came back on it right away. And then on the backside, a black dominant super skunk seems to be throwing lay, but catching botrytis really kind of quickly, otherwise looking healthy in this little 3 plant set of just experimental run. But the Dominions work there, the local skunk, this one pheno, just really awesome, gassy, kind of skunky gas skunk, or sweet gas skunk, more than just raunchy skunk, I would say. So yeah, anyway, I have the strain list though, so I'll read it off this year, what we're working with. We've got some cherry chem. I've got a Tropicana kosher tangy on my gas mask called Masquerade. I've got a strawberry lime pheno of my Holy Road. I've got some 91 Royale and grapefruit skunk sided Holy Road. I've got a gas mask Backcross 1, some Black Wilson Reserve, Cough BX1, the candy coated ROM SBSE. We've got that local skunk. Guava mask is doing amazingly well, just really kind of running the number of phenos, not a whole ton, but enough of them to get a good look on it, and had great results there. So the cherry mask is doing really well also. And I would share back that the cherry chem was from South Fork seeds I got given to me at an Emerald Cup right before I came back here like 6 to 7 years ago. And usually see the indica sided stuff in Maine kind of go, like you might have mentioned, with newer indica types introduced to the land. Even though we like some of them, I've had to breed with like a blackberry pie local cut to get the resistance out a year or two later from it. And I'm seeing it even a year later. But you know, going back to it, I've saw cherry chem this year from a seed pheno that really showed such good health that it did hit a septoria, a little bit of challenge, which, you know, to bring it up, septoria is like crushing trees that are 20, 30 feet tall now in Maine over the last 2 years. And the locals are talking about, I walk the woods and see it. And it seems like a climate change, but a different conversation type of thing. And I'd get, you know, information from the people on that one. Actually seems to be where we're at with it. But
it's like
we're having to breed through septoria.
Fusarium and Fusarium too in your areas, and just this area in New England and up. It's
what I've heard.
It's new for me in the last few years, but
yeah,
New York, you never had these types of things. So it's yeah, I don't know. It's like yeah, we're having to treat, you know, even reverse osmosis water has to be treated, and you know, even with, you know, going through systems. So it's really challenging. I don't know, you know, what you're doing to
yeah, we're seeing these different blights pop up, Collin, like that, like this, you know, Septoria fusarium. I've seen more Septoria, but it's added a whole new level of not negative, but actually positive movement for plant adaptation in the breeding that we're doing with I'm doing all that.
Yes.
Nice.
And
yeah, man.
I'm finding I'm breeding more for Septoria resistance now than any of the botrytis or PMs, like old news. Botrytis is hard in Maine, but the Septoria is such a kicker with even big trees. I can see it in nature take certain types, not others.
Right.
So I'm seeing it back to the plants with cannabis. It's not strain specific, it's pheno specific. I've seen sisters touching each other like my guava kush, and I documented it this year, where it's literally knocked off the flower's healthy, but the Septoria hit everything, even with a clean out twice. And we just took it down early, and it was finished. It was on the indica side thing too. but the more sativa expressing sister right next door, touching it 1.5 feet away, not one touch of septoria on it. So I'm kind of like having to breed more through that these days than anything else, but seeing things that are resistant, you know, on one thing and not another. The light hit of septoria at the end on cherry chem, but otherwise it like moved on from no mildew, no botrytis, even into second stage cut off the tops. You know, right now, checking it every day. And I would share back to that as the limonene family, and then now into the whatever cherry you guys would know more makes up into the cherry pie on Chem D. Like I think it was back cross 3 or 4 on the Chem D. And it's all cherry pie sided too. It's just got a little glass, you know, gas glisten. It doesn't wash, although you might be able to pull something. It doesn't wash for us, you know, but it's a flower strain.
I'll come up.
Yeah. So
I'll come up.
yeah, I was gonna say I got a few goodies that I can't wait to like throw your way to see if you pull something off them. Like the grapefruit skunk holy road, you know, it goes back to that Calio skunk one cut from Humboldt clone. That's not like your typical Tangy. And I met it with
one of my
April
all-time
Food Cake.
favorites. Yeah.
Yeah, see, and it goes grapefruit skunk. You know what I'm talking about? It's really grapefruit skunking, and
Hey,
you
Jim.
know, so I can't watch. What's that?
I hate to interrupt, but I need to. My flight's boarding in like 7 minutes, so I need to just say goodbye. But also in relation to this specific thing, if you look at obviously the limonene and linalool dominant, so for citrus, there typically is also a lot of alpha and beta pinene and cedrine, and those combinations are what make up pine sol and a lot of the coniferous oils that are used as antifungals. And I suspect that those will probably have a lot of impact on that, and they taste great. So, you know, as a target, like if you can find any piney varieties, cross them with limonene varieties, you're probably going to get a decent little sort of antifungal cocktail there. I really wish I could stay on, but I need to finish this, and I would love to talk to you guys more. You have my email, and likewise, I'm going to see if I can reach out, because this is fascinating. I love it.
Thanks for sharing, Nick. Always a pleasure.
All right, peace out, everybody.
Peace out. Wow, that was a good solid 3 hours. I wanted to hear a little bit more from Wade, because we haven't heard enough from Wade. How is everything going in Wade's world right now?
Things are going pretty good in Wade's world. I've been loving this conversation and seeing some of the faces, and enjoying my dab rig here. It occurred to me to try and do a memory test and review what I've heard today. I know early on in the conversation, Kelly and Josh were talking about getting a letter from the EPA about their products, and it occurs to me to say that that's a sign of respect. They recognize that you're actually doing something in the market, and to some extent, you're a threat to an existing business model. And one of the thoughts I had as that conversation progressed was, I live in California, where we have an abundance of rules and regulations for everything, and especially cannabis. And to be quite honest, in my opinion, especially as a patient myself, at a whole new serious level now in my life, we've made a hot mess of legalization. It's not really legalization, it's commercialization. But that wanders off to a different topic, and I wanted to try again, like a memory thing. After that, we got into this thing about science and nature. And I think of science myself as, and I'm not a paid scientist, Mark, but I understand your point, well said. To me, science is really a method of trying to understand nature in all its various aspects, everything from the stars and the universe that we live in to how our bodies work. And we wouldn't know so much about how cannabis has the effects it does in the body, in addition to psychoactivity, if it weren't for science. I mean, science wanted to learn about cannabis and did and has revealed an incredible amount. And Mark Scialdone, Dr. Mark Scialdone pointed to a paper, I think he referenced CBDA and some of the effects that it's had. And yeah, I'm a big fan, as you can imagine. Let's see, after that, it went towards, oh yeah, we got into thiols and their the effects and their presence. And Sam was talking about doing the 25 milligrams THC and then adding a terpene one at a time, one day at a time. I love that kind of methodical approach because that's science, actually. That's, especially if you keep track of what you're doing. Records, I'm sure Sam does. Breeding into scale, you know, I'm just stunned at the breadth of knowledge in this group of people that you invite, Marcus. And in a certain way, I feel very humbled to sit here with you all today. But I also feel inspired, you know. My life has changed pretty dramatically in the last year, but in a good way, because there were some health challenges happening in my life 4 or 5 years ago that didn't make sense to me. It wasn't the person that I always thought lived in this body. You know, the body was going through some changes. I think it's part of getting old. But for me, it was specifically a form of cancer that has manifested in my bones. And so on that conversation about science and nature, I love nature very much. I've spent a good portion of my life trying to understand how a garden works and what the diversity of nature can do for a plant that I love very much. And now, what I found as a patient myself is that in the regulated market in California, even in Nevada County, which is where I live between Nevada City and Grass Valley in the Sierra foothills. Even here, where our local Cannabis Alliance has created a program through the whole supply chain where any patient who has a medical recommendation from their physician can get free product that's been donated by the supply chain. All of the license holders in our area contribute, not all of them, a good portion of them. And I've taken advantage, I helped set that up. And over the last year, I have actually taken advantage of that program quite a bit. But even me, with all of the people I know, it's kind of hard to find versions of the cannabis plant chemistry in products where I can get the couple of 100 milligrams that I want a couple times a day. I'm not really so much trying to control my cancer because back to science for a second, and if this is too much information, anybody interrupt. But back to science, I ended up in a series of hospitals in December of last year, about coming on 10 months ago now. And at one of them down in Stanford, I got a course of radiation in one day, one dose. It worked wonders, at least my experience, other than a sunburn around my mouth. But my appetite improved. I slept better. I was less pain. And meantime, yeah, I was on a pretty aggressive course of chemo. And I think it kept me alive. I'm really grateful. I have a really renewed and profound sense of how life really is a gift. Your chance to be involved with family, to be involved in a community, back to the theme of this morning's church, the idea that we are in fact a community. And as as Wade sitting here on his little patio, looking at my pond and these big, beautiful trees. In my situation, I feel really grateful, actually. I don't know many people who are better situated in their life to be doing what I'm doing right now. Multiple myeloma is the kind of cancer that I have. It's a specific bone marrow cell called a plasmid. Kind of goes crazy. Not only doesn't die off, makes insane numbers of clones of itself and crowds out all the other types of bone marrow cells, and meantime bursts the bones from the inside. Sorry to be specific and gruesome, but there it is. So pain is a bit of an issue. And I think that in my case, at least, because every person's different, our metabolism, our body's needs, our body's ability to respond to something like a cancer. It's been a fascinating question to me, trying to understand, because this is a cancer of cells of the immune system, the effects of high dosage cannabis use. And specifically in my case, of course, I'm mixing CBD and THC in various versions, ingesting as well as dabbing on my little mini nail thing. Yeah, the combination of having done some time trying to understand how my mind works through a form of Buddhism, if you will, that I did for a number of years, through a really lifelong interest in how things grow, how do things work, and specifically how do plants work? How does that happen? How do you put a seed in the ground and the combination of moisture and soil and sun produce this plant that feeds us, so provides these beautiful flowers, these incredible aromatic plants that can have such profound effects on our experience. And meantime, here I am, what's true is my cancer seems to have responded really well to treatment. At this point, I'm on a fairly low dose of a chemotherapy drug, which so far my oncologist is saying, no, you don't want to stop it, Wade. Look at the good results you're having. And it's true, all my blood work's going in the right directions. I've known enough cancer patients. I don't remember who it was that referenced that a patient is not really a great term for who we are. Because yeah, I've been a patient under California law for glaucoma since, well, before there was such a thing. I was diagnosed back in 94, 95. And anyway, cannabis, I love this plant. One of the other points that I came to mind to say is we've already looked at or can see in medicine, they have a high THC, Marinol is one of the names of it, that you can get prescribed by a doctor and get it in a hospital here in the United States, approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Same is true with Epidiolex. You can get it delivered to your home. One of the reasons I am celebrating today, despite all of the other, I've been buying a lot, but I really am, these are tears of gratitude. Because yeah, that made me, Epidiolex made me think of a couple of the families that I know who have family members who are dealing with severe epilepsy. One of them's been on our show a couple of times here. Your show, Marcus, thank you.
Our show.
Forrest Hurd, speak of community. He and his son Silas have had a huge effect on the conversation about cannabis in Nevada County. We're proposed, anyway, back to Silas. He is, this is a boy who, if you don't know the story, I'll tell anybody that wants to hear it for a second. When I met Forrest and Silas, Silas was 7 years old, and Forrest was at a public meeting where he was showing pictures of his son in the hospital because he had just been told that his son likely wouldn't make it to the age of 10 due what was eventually diagnosed as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is you got to have like 10 different kinds of seizures. And this kid was seizing 100 times a day or more. Well, today, or no, let's see, September 11th of this past month is 1 year since Silas had a seizure. He's still doing several hundred milligrams of CBD and THC. There's a specific cultivar we found back in 2014 or 2015 called Medihaze. The results of it were published in O'Shaughnessy's in that issue that year, called Medihaze. And yeah, that specific version of Medihaze, the seeds came from Europe, gave Silas really profound and immediate relief from his seizures. And we still have a couple of, I think we still have like 100 and some grams of a high potency extraction of that oil that seems to work pretty well. But that original cut, the clone, is gone for a variety of reasons. And Forrest did at one point try and titrate Silas off of the dose of the Medihaze that he was mixing into the other plant oils he had access to. And he started showing signs of a seizure might be coming on. And so he went right back to using the Medihaze. So, you know, there's a lot of good news there. Silas is now in high school. He's actually coming out of his shell enough that he's doing dance class as a sophomore in high school. So this is a huge change and improvement in his well-being. In the meantime, the other story I just wanted to say, one of the other reasons I'm feeling deep gratitude. I met a family when, I don't know if Etienne's still on the call, but back when Steep Hill moved from Oakland to Berkeley, they did one of their first public facing events, invited a whole bunch of their clients to come see their new place. And I went down there thinking I would meet a bunch of farmers. Silly me. The place was full of people in shiny, big watches and shiny shoes and suits. And I was dressed like a farmer, kind of like I am today. And I was one of like 2 or 3 people in a crowd of 100 or 200 that were there. But I visited with the Reverend Dr. Cameron and my friend Fred Gardner, and we shared nice food and the conversation for a while. And Cameron was pretty excited about it, but I understand that's kind of closed down now. I met a family there that night. One of the few folks that weren't in shiny shoes and suits and whatnot was his family, who had a young man in a wheelchair, and he was covered in a blanket and he had a mask on and he was in a catatonic state, rictus, I think it's called. That might be the wrong term, but his hands were clenched and his legs were locked up and he was in a fetal position in this wheelchair. And so I walked up to him and I asked him, what are y'all doing here? And they were looking for somebody who could grow some ACDC or might have some for their son, who was 21 when I met this family. And I won't name anybody because where they live is actually still a threat to their home if their community knows that they use cannabis. In California, homeowner associations. Anyway, that family, they were there. I had some ACDC in my garden that year, and I had already figured out its genetics did not do well in the hot, dry summers of Nevada County. It was discovered, if you will, identified as a plant of interest over on the Mendocino coast, I guess, is my understanding of the story there, where, there's a lot of moisture in the air and the peak heat in the summers might get into the 80s. Well, here we just flirted with 100 here and single-digit humidity levels this past summer for at least a few weeks. And anyway, ACDC was not doing well in my garden. But I said, well, if you're looking for CBD, I have some, because I was already starting to, I was creating a product we called Wonder Drops. It was a 25-to-1 and I was so proud of it, man. It had a label, it had all the milligrams in it. It was tested. We had 350 milligrams of CBD, 14 milligrams of THC. And every one of those milligrams came from my garden. And meantime, we had hundreds and hundreds of these bottles going out to a bunch of dispensaries up and down California at one point. Anyway, I handed it to Mom, because she was the one who was really engaged on the cannabis thing. And she said, yeah, this is exactly what he needs, but he would need 2 of these a day. And I went, wow, okay. One of the daughters of the family has engaged with an indoor operation that allows them to preserve some of the genetics. We found a specific high CBD, low THC version that did well in our neighborhood called Remedy, and another version of similar genetics called Therapy that passed through here. Both of those did quite well for that young man, who is now just turned 30. Like I said, his family is now providing his oils for him. But the mother and one of the other, a son of that family, came to visit to tell me how well they were doing and to give thanks. I think it's why we do this work. When you, I love the cannabis plant personally for the psychoactive effects that Sam is such a devotee of, and most of us are. But I also love her for some of the other effects that I have seen in, and just to loop back into the conversation that we've been having here and to stop taking up so much time. Science helps me and us understand the magic, if you will, that is nature. There's a deep wisdom in nature if we take the time to look. The fellow who's doing that series of books, Teeming with Microbes, Teeming with Fungi, Teeming with Bacteria, Larnfels, I think is his name, saw him speak a couple of times. And yeah, he's pointing in a really great direction. The woman who's recognizing the importance of mother trees and regeneration of forests. Those of us, Kelly and Josh, who are pointing to the importance of living soil and regenerative practices. And I went into regenerative practices myself a long time ago. One, because I wanted to reduce the impact of my indoor gardening in San Francisco when I was doing that. And then when I came up here, because despite doing Wonder Drops, I was still giving a lot of my product away. Because when somebody's sick, how can you tell them they have to pay you for what you have that might save the life of their child? Anyway, that's my testimony, if you will, for today on Hash Church, is my gratitude for the love that is this plant and what she offers to us. I think of her as a manifest. Can I go into God for a second? I think in discussion with my friend Swami Chaitanya of Swami Select, he's a full Hindu holy guy, I've known him for a long time. He and I talk spirituality sometimes, and it's really far out to dig into the Vedic traditions of spirituality. And we, if you will, argued for a while back and forth about if there is God, what is it? And it was what we arrived on that I like is God is the sum total of all sentience, not just in humans, but humans play a huge part, at least on this planet. But the trees, the rocks, the crystals, the fish, literally the fungi, the bacteria in the air that we breathe, and all of that, all the way out to all the stars and galaxies and everything that we can conceive of where there is sentience contributes to what we think of as God. And you can find God within yourself. You can find it by looking at flowers. You can find it by coming and do that to the best of your ability. And Marcus, I want to really call you out and appreciate you for pointing to the importance of only smoking and using the best that you can make or find of whatever it is you're taking to help your life feel the way you want it to feel. Because it's, anyway, that was a long stoned rap. And thank you for the platform, the opportunity, the community. Because yeah, this is, to me, at heart, really about what cannabis was always about when we were all hiding and were, you know, used to be when you met with a group of cannabis activists, it was, the news was about who'd gotten busted, what was their trial looking like, what were the charges, blah, 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 blah. And now, you know, it's about taxes and what's the new VCC regulations going to look like, and how is appellations of origin going to work, and yada, 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 yada. But we've come so far, and we still got a long way to go. We still got a long way to go. I want to call out a thing that's happening next weekend. I don't know if you're going to do another church next weekend, Marcus, but a group of hash makers, some of the beautiful rosins and whatnot I've been hitting on here this morning and all week, have been, some of them come to me through the donation program, but some of them come to me through folks who aren't really licensed or permitted to do so, but are, if you will, sharing their personal use beautiful work. I gotta say, because I'm really stoned. And yeah, I wanted to do that memory test to see if how stoned I am. And I'll have to go back and listen to this at some point. But I really do feel deep gratitude. I am getting stronger every day, is how it feels to me. I will point to most of my cannabis use at this point is focused on my enjoyment of the day, particularly as how it relates to pain management. Because I want to be able to move around, and I can do it for a little while. Sitting this long has been an interesting challenge. I'm doing great at the moment because I'm really stoned, and it helps a lot with pain. And yes, I also ingest quite a bit because I find that, especially for long-term relief, if I don't want to have my dab rig fired up and going all day long, right next to the bed or out on the patio like I am today. Yeah, I'm taking some what's colloquially known as RSO. But yeah, next Sunday, a group of folks is going to gather here at my farm, and we're going to celebrate hash in the same way that we are doing here today. And honestly, I'm not even sure what time we're gathering next week, but if we're doing hash church, I'll be here. The neurosurgery people still want me to, they have their hooks in me back to science and nature. I'm doing everything I can to heal my bones because, again, this kind of cancer kind of blows them out. But that was a very, 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 very long-winded way of saying, actually, I'm doing really good for anyone that wants to know. Deep gratitude here. Really, I'm kind of stunned. And a big part of that is, hey, I survived what looked like might be a not survivable moment. And that's pretty far out.
And thank you for working with us and our veterans as well, because not only have you been sick, you've been working with us. So thank you.
Etienne, I really want to appreciate you for calling me out on that. I have, again, in the same way that this has been an incredible nourishment to me today. I don't usually say a lot in the Veterans Action Council meetings, and I certainly don't make them all, because yeah, there's a lot of drama going on here on the farm. But again, me personally, I'm doing great. Yeah, heroic effort you guys did last, what, 2 weeks ago now? 12 veterans and spouses of veterans going to Washington, D.C. and putting in the time and the footwork. 12 miles, you said, over 2 days on concrete?
Stone, yes.
Yeah. And meantime, because you're veterans, I'm a veteran too, that's why I'm sitting in on it. Again, I feel humbled to be in the company of the folks that are on the Veterans Action Council. Myself, I was this, I joined the Navy to avoid being drafted to go to Vietnam, because I was of the era where my draft number, we had a lottery in place at that point, and I was number 34. And meantime, they didn't want to take student loans. College, I went for 1.5 years. It made no sense to me at all what was going on. And so I quit that. And yeah, I ended up joining the Navy on a Saturday, and my notice to report for induction would have meant you're in the Army now and going to Vietnam, hello boy, arrived on that following Monday. But I had already signed a contract to join the Navy. And meantime, yeah, the Navy and I didn't get along great. We'll just leave it at that. They kicked me out at my request. Another long story. And Etienne, I will write my bio for the Veterans Action Council thing. I know you've asked me a couple times. Again, I'm humbled. I in the company of people like yourself, or Al Byrne, or Michael Krawitz, or, I mean, this Todd Scatini. I mean, you just go down the list. It's like Pearson Crosby. I mean, it's just, wow. So thoughtful, impassioned people who are really a lot on the same page we are, trying to change the laws, trying to educate the people who actually can change the laws. And I think to your point earlier, Etienne, local is where you can really bring change to bear. And there it's at least partially about making the story personal. When you can touch people's hearts, you can change their minds. And on that note, I'm going to stop. That was, yeah, I would love to come back if you're doing it again, Marcus. And I actually do have a science question for you, Dr. Mark. Can I send? I think I still have an email for you and or Sam about. Yeah. I don't know if I could. We should take it offline or take it.
Go ahead, fire away. If you have it, probably other people are thinking the same damn thing, right?
Well, you reference. Okay, if you don't mind, Marcus, I am kind of bound by an agreement not to get too specific. I'll start there. A state health department is in a certain state is struggling with the fact that a limited number, this is in the United States, a limited number of their licensed producers and for the sake of conversation, we'll say there's 10. 4 or 5 of them in the last few months have consistently started popping up with analogs of Delta 9, Delta 10, Delta 6, probably some OHCC, I think you referenced, in products that typically shouldn't have it, like in flour or in other products, at concentrations that are completely inappropriate for something that hasn't been treated in some way. Meantime, the rest of the licensed producers in this state are not having this. The Department of Health's response to this is to just have the manufacturers who are producing product that have these analogs at a sufficient concentration to put it on their packaging and labeling as one of the cannabinoids in the product. And I personally feel a strong objection to that, but I would love to hear your or Sam's thoughts on that. And obviously, to me, it's a public health and safety issue because we don't really know what these analogs do, as well as what else is along for the ride when those analogs are in.
I can pipe in really short and fast that we don't find 10 or 8 when we're looking in our lab. So something's wrong. What do you say, Mark?
Yeah, so this is prohibition economics at work, and it costs a lot of money to put THC into a product. So the cheapest, the guy who can do that for the cheapest makes the most money in a free market economy. And so if we're just talking about cannabinoids in general, yeah. So again, the way we were talking about this earlier, this loophole that's in the Farm Bill that legalized industrial hemp, which is CBD, blessing and a curse, because I think I've said it before on Hash Church, as long as there's prohibition anywhere, there'll be a black market everywhere. And what that means is that legal licensed producers have to somehow economically keep up to have a competitive product in the marketplace. And if the only knob they have to turn is the cost of their ingredients, you could basically make THC cheaper from readily, abundantly available CBD isolate and a chemical conversion, put that into your products cheaper than, hire a team, the greenhouse, grow cannabis, extract cannabis, make cannabis oil, put it into gummies. It's cheaper just to buy the commodity, mix it into the gummy, and you're there quicker, cheaper, better, quicker. And so I think it's interesting because different states are taking different approaches to this, and they realize that, I think, again, this can only happen because of prohibition of Delta 9, right? So if Delta 9 was available and everybody was making Delta 9 across the board in the entire country, and even in the entire world, right? There wouldn't be a need for Delta 8. This Delta 8 market came up from, the Farm Bill, and the fact that in the language of the Farm Bill, they only reference that what they did, the Farm Bill removes industrial hemp from the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act. And it's defined as cannabis with less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC. There was no mention about Delta 8, and they never contemplated the fact that, Roger Adams first did it in the 40s, and then Meshulam redid it back in the 70s, is that you could chemically convert CBD into THC. And when you do that conversion under certain conditions, you get Delta 8, which they don't mention in the Farm Bill. And what's now complicated things is that because Delta 8 is actually mentioned in the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act, now they're hydrogenating that Delta 8 and making HHC That's where HHC comes from. And they're like, well, HHC is not on the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act. But, you know, be that as it may, this is all made possible because of the ridiculousness of prohibition itself. And if you're making a psychoactive substance in a chemical reaction vessel, it's different than extracting it from a plant, right? It's different than from nature itself. And when you get that whole spectrum,
Mark, when you make delta 8, you're semi-synthesizing it from CBD, which is illegal under the Controlled Substance Act. So, I mean, it might fit through the loophole of the Farm Act, but delta 8 is not legally produced.
Well, where CBD runs into issues, and again, they never contemplated this. So I think, Sam, my feeling, again, you know, all your work and everything that went into GW's Epidiolex besides, is that the legislatures got snookered on seeds, rope, and oil. And they're like, CBD, what's that? We don't care about CBD, just THC. We only care about THC. So that's the only thing that went into the language of the bill. I don't think they realized that, again, CBD being the active ingredient of an FDA approved drug, there's another law called the FD&C Act, which is the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And what that law says, which is enforced by the FDA, is that the active ingredient of an FDA approved drug cannot be used in food, feed, or cosmetic, or, you know, topical use for interstate commerce. It's interesting that they put that interstate commerce in there. So what they need to do is they need to make an exception to the FD&C Act, like I think they've done for like things like caffeine. So caffeine's like an active ingredient in drugs and stuff like that, but it's also in Coca-Cola and Mountain Dew and all that other shit, right? So they made an exception to the FD&C Act. I think caffeine actually got grandfathered in, but I think there's other examples of things that the FDA approved as active ingredients, but are okay to use. And you'll know, and Wade knows this in spades, is that what Charlotte Webb, the company Charlotte's Web did, I don't know if this is the Stanley Brothers anymore or not, but what the company Charlotte's Web said, okay, fine, we'll submit CBD extracts as a dietary supplement from hemp, because industrial hemp, right, cannabis with lower than 0.3% THC, was removed from the Controlled Dangerous Substance Act. So the Farm Bill enabled now the production of hemp. It's like, well, okay, hemp is an agriculturally produced food, I guess, in a manner of speaking, right? You can make seed oil, you can make seed protein from it, right, Marcus? So it's essentially a food, and there's different regulation there. So the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, only cares to the point where the crop is grown, right? So all the amendments that go on the land, you know, whether it's organic, non-organic, and all about farming and agricultural production. And the USDA kind of washes their hands after that. It sort of becomes the FDA's bailiwick to pick up, okay, now that corn has been grown, now it goes to market. Yeah, if you're Del Monte and you want to make cans of corn, because that's what you do with corn, right? You need an FDA inspected facility, certain levels of quality and production standards that have to be held to, because you're making a variable agricultural product that's being put into these Del Monte cans of corn that people are eating, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think where this goes, again, is this run into big corporations, because now you're talking about industrial agriculture. You're talking about Archer's Daniel Midland. You're talking about big chemical companies that bought the seed companies that engineered seeds to be resistant to the chemicals that they sell. Oh boy. And again, yes, so like we were talking earlier, the EPA regulates that. So I know that USDA regulates the genetically modified soybeans and corns that are grown today. But I've said it before. I think, and I think Marcus, you agree that one of the big drivers for hemp to overtake soybeans is going to be on protein production per acre. When it comes down to it, if you need to grow protein, you need to grow this crop because this crop produces way more protein per acre than soybeans, and it requires less chemicals. But when you say less chemicals, now those chemical companies get upset because they want to sell the chemicals. Right?
Yep. It's not just the protein, it's also the fact that you simultaneously create oil. So you're producing protein, but when you're defatting the protein, you're creating oil simultaneously. So it's two products. I wanted to say thank you to Wade. I didn't think that was too long at all. It was awesome. It was so good to hear from you. I love the whole recap of the Hash Church that we had. I love the update of how you were doing. I know I'm not the only one, because I read a ton of people in the chat saying, oh, I've been thinking a lot about Wade lately. I always think a lot about you, Wade, and it's just nice to hear your humanity. I know how you feel things, because when you speak, you get us to feel the things that you feel. It's a very profound and powerful tool that you have at your disposal, but it's wonderful, and it couldn't have been a better part of Hash Church for you to share everything that you did. And of course, I'll do a Hash Church next week, and we'll talk to you and all the hash makers that are coming by your farm. And I'm really glad to hear that you're getting better, and that, like, you know, I know things were rough there for a while. I was following the updates on Facebook, and I'm just glad that you've been able to get through all of that. Of course, you're still in it, but get through the sort of I don't know what it is when we're going through those things. Oh, lack of hope, you know, but just you're such a positive, vibrant person, and I appreciate you sharing with us on Hash Church. It is our show, not my show.
There's community again. Again, it's an industry, but it's at heart, really, it is a community.
Absolutely. And on that note, I think I'm going to wrap it up for this week. So many wonderful people to come in and share the vibes last minute often. You know, got to really thank all of you for coming and doing this every time. It's I'm realizing more and more how much I need it myself, and it's terrible to sometimes feel like I don't have time. I have to sacrifice going to see my son skating. You know, this is his skating lesson time. So, and I'm sure there's sacrifices for all of you to be made as well. And I do appreciate it. It doesn't go unseen or unfelt. And I thank the more than 200 people that have been watching with us since we started at 9 a.m. for almost 4 hours of what I just thought was awesome conversation. I'm going to dissect it, maybe listen to it again, and maybe create specific hash churches for the specific conversations that we had, because there was at least 4 or 5 really good ones. Big thanks to Valeri Coral for coming on. Big thanks for Hillary Black for showing up when she's not feeling the best in the chat room and sharing a bit of her vibes. I want to shout out Ron, one of my OG mentors, who was in the room as well. There he is right there. He just chimed in. So shout out to you, Ron. Hopefully we can have you come on one day and tell some stories. And of course, Skunman Sam, Etienne, Dr. Mark, Best Friend Farms, Collin, and Wade, and the Dragonfly Earth Medicine. Love you all, really. Give thanks for everything, and we will see you all hopefully again next week. Peace out, everybody. May the full melt bless your bowl sooner than later. Ciao for now.